Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. Welcome to The Sleep Haunt, where truth and terror travel side by side. Tonight, we bring you 9 true most disturbing trucker horror stories, tales from endless roads, haunted motels, and miles where the darkness seemed to breathe. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep the wheels turning through the shadows. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. The stretch between Dalhart and Amarillo is a flat hush even in the daytime, but after midnight it becomes a wide, pale sea. Mason drove it often, hauling chilled produce toward distribution centers that woke before dawn. He preferred nights. Fewer headlights, fewer merges, fewer surprises. He kept the radio low and the rig steady at 62, letting the engine find its easiest breath. The sky above him was so clear that the stars looked threaded into the darkness, like beads stitched through black velvet. He was alone in the lane, and yet he felt the company of 1,000 small sounds wind-combing the mirrors, the periodic tick of the trailer's suspension, the tiny rattles that told him everything was as it should be. He hadn't touched the CB in a while. Some runs were chattery, others were monastic. This was a quiet one. He reached for the mic anyway and flipped through channels the way one might flip through old photographs. A habit more than a need. Static, a cough in the distance, a faint voice talking about weather that might have been 2 states away. Mason set it down, sipped his coffee, and watched a lone windmill turn slow against the horizon. The voice came when he least expected it. Not a crackle, not a bark, but something soft, like a string plucked in the next room. A small voice, high and careful, as if it were speaking around a secret. Is anyone listening? Mason's hand returned to the mic without thinking. He didn't key it. He just listened, watching the double yellow line stitched to the edge of his headlight throw, and then disappear under the nose of the truck. Static gathered, parted, and the voice came again. Hello. Is anyone there? He glanced at the radio's display. Channel 19. It hadn't moved. He was alone on the highway, alone on the frequency. He didn't spook easily. He'd driven through fogs that closed the world down to the span of his hood and a wing mirror, and downpour nights when the rain layered everything in glass. He'd heard pranksters and late-night talkers. This wasn't that. The voice had a steadiness that didn't belong to someone looking for a laugh. He keyed the mic. 18-wheeler southbound on 87. You're coming through. What's your location? Silence folded onto the channel like a blanket. Then, in the same careful tone, it's cold at the bridge. A bridge. Plenty of those on this run. He pictured the low concrete spans over dry arroyos. Narrow overpasses like whispers in the landscape. The next sign said 49 miles to Amarillo, and the night was a glass lake. Which bridge? He asked. His voice was level. He used the same tone he used when talking to dispatch after midnight. Ordinary, calm, no answer. Just a slow swell of static, as if the wind had turned in the wires. He waited. Sometimes a weak radio would float in and out, like a moth by a porch bulb. He asked again, naming exits, naming towns, whichever came to mind. The voice did not come back. Mason let the radio settle and returned his attention to the road. He checked the mirrors, checked the gauges, checked the shape of the sky ahead. His eyes kept sliding to the channel display anyway. The voice hung in the cab the way a scent lingers. He told himself he would not let it distract him. He'd heard stray transmissions bounce off the atmosphere in strange ways before. A voice from hundreds of miles away suddenly skating across his reception like a flat stone across water. He drove on. The lines unspooled. The stars held their place. A weathered green sign approached, the kind that looked older than the road itself. The paint was sun-bleached, the arrows simple and plain. It named a frontage lane that Mason didn't remember using in years. Above the smaller arrow, a faded sticker read, Bridge Road, and someone had tried to peel it off. The corners clung like stubborn leaves. The CB hissed again. Are you still there? Mason eased off the throttle just a hair. The sign passed. Bridge Road. The night lay quiet around him. Scrub brush and grass and fence posts, marching toward the horizon. He had time. His schedule had wiggle in it. The load in the trailer wasn't impatient. He could take 10 minutes to look. It was a thought he allowed. And once allowed, it was as if the road agreed. He signaled, merged onto the ramp for the frontage road, and felt the change in the texture of the pavement, like the difference between two songs. The main highway fell away to his left, a wash of light that slowly dimmed as he rolled along a narrower spine. The shoulders tightened. The fence grew closer. The stars seemed even brighter here, as if the night were interested in what he was doing. "Still here," he said into the mic, headed toward a bridge. "If you can hear this, say anything that tells me I'm close." Static and then a gentle click, like a distant door. "Thank you." The word was barely there, and it made his skin move under his jacket. He didn't say, "You're welcome." He didn't say, "Who is this?" He simply drove. The road ran straight and slightly downhill. The brush parted around a shallow valley. He saw the bridge in the distance, a low concrete arch with a rail the color of old coins. No other vehicles. No night creatures darted across. The world held its breath. There was a barrier at the far side, reflective barrels and a sawhorse with a sign that proclaimed the obvious road closed, though not with urgency. Mason slowed and let the truck crawl. The surface was intact. No broken slabs, no potholes. He rolled onto the bridge as gently as a person easing a door open in a sleeping house. He stopped in the center, set his hazards, and listened. The engine idled. The blinkers clicked like a metronome in the quiet. The air smelled like dust and cold water that hadn't moved in a long time. Under the bridge, whatever drainage ditch had once required this span was a shallow scar, lined with stones gone pale under the moon. He took the mic. At the bridge, for a long moment, the radio offered only the faint whisper of distance. Then the voice returned, a little clearer, as if it had found a way to sit on the ledge of the signal. "Please leave a light." That was an odd request, but it made a kind of sense in the old logic of the road. The way drivers left notes taped to coffee machines or warned about deer on a stretch with no signage. Mason reached into the cubby on the dash and pulled out a small LED flashlight. He had two. He kept the spare for when another driver needed one at a dark receiver yard. He popped the door, climbed down, and felt the chill of the concrete through the soles of his work boots. The night opened around him. His hazards pulsed orange across the surface of the bridge rails. In that glow, the world had a heartbeat. He set the flashlight on the rail, clicked it on, and angled it downward toward the space under the bridge where shadows pooled. The beam slid along stones and weeds, and caught on something small against the far support. A little metal tag, the kind that might hang from a collar or keychain, fixed to the concrete with a rusted screw. It looked old, but not ancient. Someone had been here. More than once, perhaps. Mason hesitated. He didn't pry. He didn't reach for it. He let the light rest, steady and white. After a minute, the CB breathed again. "That's enough." The engine idled. The blinkers kept time. He waited, attention tuned to the smallest sounds the way a person might listen for footsteps in a hallway. When nothing else came across the air, he climbed back into the cab, closed the door gently, and sat with his hands on the wheel. He did not feel fear in the way fear normally arrived, a jolt, a spike. Instead, he felt a quiet, as if some tension in the night had relaxed. He turned off the hazards, eased the truck forward, crossed the rest of the span, and nosed through the simple barrier, which parted like a curtain when he moved the sawhorse to the side. He repositioned it afterward and rejoined the frontage road, then the highway, with the care of someone placing a book back on a shelf. He drove. The CB returned to its usual hiss and occasional half-words. The stars were where they had been. The lines unrolled. The windmill on the horizon had moved farther along its slow carousel. At a truck stop near Vega, he refueled and poured fresh coffee. He mentioned the voice to no one. The cashier, a night shift veteran with a crocheted blanket over the back of her chair, asked how the roads were. He said fine. She nodded toward a bulletin board near the restrooms. Folks leave things there, she said, which didn't have anything to do with him, and yet felt like it did. On the board were the usual notices, a printout about a lost dog from 3 towns back, a recipe for biscuits shared by someone's grandmother, a flyer advertising mobile repair. Tucked behind the edge of a flapping map was a yellowed scrap of paper with a few lines written in tidy hand. Mason read it twice. If you hear the small, a voice on 19 asking for a bridge, leave a light. It goes quiet for the night when someone does. No signature, no date. The edges of the paper had curled. Below it, a receipt had been pinned in its place by a thumbtack that had seen other jobs. The ink had faded, but the name of the store at the top matched the one he was in. The date was a spring day 6 years earlier. Someone had bought a little LED flashlight, one of the models that hung by the counter. The penmanship at the bottom said paid in cash. Mason looked down the aisle and saw the display of tiny torches, half full, their plastic blister packs reflecting the fluorescent lights. A driver at the coffee counter caught Mason glancing at the board and said without turning, "You heard it, didn't you?" His tone was plain, not prying. He stirred sugar into his cup as if discussing traffic. Mason considered the rules of road talk the ones so ingrained that they felt like instinct. Never corner the strange thing. Let it come to you if it wants. He nodded. A small tilt of his head. The other driver said, "Happens every few weeks. Not to everyone. Doesn't last long. Old timer told me it's a repeater still catching something from a ditch out past Bridge Road." He blew on his coffee. "They say if someone leaves a light, the channel clears for the night." His eyes met Mason's. "Did you?" "I did," Mason said. The words felt like stones laid in a line. "Then you gave the rest of us a quiet run." The other driver lifted his cup a little in a gesture between a toast and a thank you. "Appreciated." There was no weight to the comment, no demand that they stand in the shadow of anything. The conversation folded itself neatly and tucked away, the way nighttime courtesy does. Mason paid for his fuel, nodded to the cashier, and stepped back into the cool black before the glass doors slid closed on their soft tracks. He finished the drive with no more unusual notes. He watched the sky pale, the east rim turn into a bowl of light. He delivered his load to a receiver that played gentle music near dawn, the kind that made forklifts look as if they were moving in time to something only machines could hear. The day shifted into its ordinary shape. He slept in the afternoon, the blackout curtain doing its best, the room cooled by the hum of the unit on the wall. Weeks passed. He thought of the bridge only in the way one thinks of a dream that leaves a crisp afterglow. When his route took him near that stretch again, he felt no compulsion to detour. He let the main highway carry him. The CB was ordinary and full of the usual. Night unspooled like a ribbon from the same spool as always. Then, one wind-bent evening when clouds had laid themselves in long gray planks across the sky, the voice returned. "Is anyone listening?" Mason's hand reached the mic without ceremony. "Yes. It's cold at the bridge," the small voice said again, the way a song repeats a line. He weighed his time, his fuel, his mind. He could drive on. Someone else might be closer. He could speak a comfort over the air and call it enough. But he remembered the scrap of paper and the simple rule it contained. And he also remembered the way the night had felt after the light was left, as if something had exhaled. He took the exit. The frontage road received him like a low whisper. The bridge waited. The sawhorse stood slightly crooked, as if a wind had nudged it, and the world had let it stay that way. He set his hazards. He turned on one of the little lights he'd bought since then, just to be sure he'd always have one. He placed it on the rail with the same care people use to straighten a photo frame. The beam found the far support. It found the tag again, small, metal, insistent. He still did not reach for it. The CB clicked. "That's enough," the voice said. And then something so soft followed that Mason might have been imagining it. "Thank you." He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the light rest on the stone. As if answering, the wind moved gently through the brush nearby. A bird stirred, annoyed at being noticed. Back in the cab, the gauges glowed their usual amber. The CB fell into polite silence. Mason drove on. As he crested a small rise before rejoining the highway, he glanced in the mirror. The flashlight's beam was a small star on the guardrail, patient and steady. He could not see it once he merged with the interstate, but the knowledge of it rode with him. A tiny, quiet passenger that asked for nothing. He didn't tell the story often. When asked about the oddest things he'd heard on the road, he mentioned weather that changed in a single mile, cranes that walked across fields like old machines learning to dance, a diner pie so good that conversation stopped at every table. He let the bridge stay right where it lived. A bend in the night that did not belong to bragging. If there was a reason for it, and there might have been, he did not name it. He had seen roadside markers and bouquet-filled ditches and handwritten notes jammed in the seams of overpasses where they met the earth. He had no wish to connect anything so tidy that it would erase the mystery. The road was made of layers. Not all of them were for him to peel back. On a later run, he stopped at the same truck stop and found the bulletin board changed, as they always are. New notices, new recipes, a photo of a staff member who'd retired after 31 years on the overnight. The scrap of paper about the light on the bridge had been removed. In its place was a small card with a picture of a lantern printed on it, and below, in the same tidy hand, "If you know, you know. Thanks." Mason smiled without showing his teeth. The night took its payments and gave its gifts, and did not always explain itself. He refilled his thermos, slid a pack of mints into his pocket, and returned to the road. He would carry an extra light from then on, and if a voice asked for one, he would leave it. It was not a heroic thing. It was just a way of saying to the dark, yes, someone is here. Someone will make the smallest patch of the unknown a little brighter for a little while. He drove on through the hours when lanes are most like rivers and the air tastes like the inside of clean glass. The road ran straight. The line ahead shone a little, as if it remembered the beam set upon a rail many miles back. And somewhere on a low concrete arch, a single flashlight burned until its battery drifted down into sleep, and the bridge, satisfied, let the night move past in peace. Story number 2. The wind over the high desert sounded like a quiet ocean, a low rush moving over a sea of sage. Renee kept both hands light on the wheel and watched the mile markers step down along Eerie, as if counting back from a dream. Her trailer held a nest of strapped steel, wrapped neat against the air, one of those loads that didn't forgive sudden moves. She liked night runs because the wind usually agreed to be polite then, and because the stars above Wyoming carried their own company. The cab glowed soft amber around her. The dash lights looked like small towns seen from far away. It was after 2 when the first odd note sounded. Odd not in a way she could point to, just a feeling of the highway whispering a line she'd heard before. Her analog watch, the one her father had given her when she completed her first cross-country trip, showed 2:07. The minute hand ticked as if it had a stubbornness in it, a little pause before it convinced itself to move. She caught the green of a sign ahead. 270. 2. Then 270. 1. Then 270. Routine. Comfortable. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a thermos and let the radio stay quiet. She didn't need noise. She had the crisp scrape of tires on cold pavement and the occasional tap of a strap tail against the trailer. When the next marker arrived, she glanced at it out of habit. Lambeitziger. She told herself she'd misread, that the angle had tricked her or the paint had been odd. The desert could make anything feel like a mirage if a person leaned too far into it. Renee eased back a hair, just a hair, and blinked up at the sky. The Big Dipper was tilted like a ladle pouring something into her windshield. Everything else looked exactly as it should. A sign for Red Desert Rest Area appeared, listing it at 2 miles. She'd planned to push on to Rock Springs, but fatigue had the firm, even weight of a blanket. Rest would be fine. She liked that rest area, the covered wagon display under sodium lights, the little plaques about pioneers and wind, a brochure rack with postcards that never ran out. She drew in, checked her mirrors, and took the exit as the wind curled under her trailer and let it down as if it were a kite. The rest area was empty except for a tanker parked nose out and a travel trailer sleeping under the farther lamp. She rolled into a slot, set her brakes, and listened to the engine idle down. The smell of cold came in when she opened the door, clean and metallic, like fresh water. Inside the building, the mop bucket sat in its corner. The map of the state shone with tiny lights, and someone had propped a door open with a stack of brochures so the air could move. The vending machine hummed a note that felt like a continuation of the highway itself. She bought a hot cup and watched it tip into place. The cup stuck halfway for an anxious breath before dropping right, the lid marbled with steam. A woman in a maintenance jacket passed through the lobby with a broom tucked under her arm. "Long night," she said in a voice that was casual and true all at once. Just keeping it between the lines, Renee answered. Keep it between the lines. The woman echoed with a nod, as if that were advice for more than driving. Back in the cab, Renee set her cup in the holder and made a note on the pad she kept on the clipboard. 213, mile 270 twice. She liked leaving breadcrumbs for herself, little markers her future eyes could catch. It wasn't about believing or not believing what she saw, it was about noticing. She eased back onto the ramp and let the tractor pull them uphill, the lights of the rest area lowering behind like a small, secure town. The highway received her. The lane slid past with that same constant hush that makes night miles feel like a gentle machine. The next marker stood ahead, plain and reassuring. The number on it was not what she expected. Lambeitsischer. She didn't brake. She didn't swerve. She stopped herself from glancing too hard into the mirrors, the temptation to find a pattern in the dark. It could be mislabeling, she told herself. It could be a maintenance crew that put a temporary marker in the wrong spot. Wyoming was full of distances that made things look closer together than they were. The green sign for Red Desert Rest Area 2 miles glowed again, quietly, as if it were remarking on the weather. Renee laughed once, under her breath, not mockingly, just in disbelief as light as a paper cup. All right, she said to the empty cab. Let's try that again. She took the exit because not taking it felt like turning away from a door you'd already opened. The layout of the lot matched her last visit exactly. The tanker cup still beaded dark under the dome of its trailer. The travel trailer slept with the same patience. In the building, the mop bucket had been moved an inch to the left. The stack of brochures propping the door had a new one on top she hadn't seen before. A small card with a lantern icon and the words, "Scenic byways you might miss at night." She lifted one, turned it over. The back listed routes she'd never taken because a person hauling big things didn't often have the option. At the bottom, a tiny line read, "Quiet journeys become clearer when you pause." Her analog watch read 2:13 again. The minute hand hung there, convinced of the time like a person refusing to admit to sleep. Renee flexed her fingers and realized she had splashed a bit of coffee on her nail. She wiped it away with her thumb. Same cup, same lid. A small ripple in the foam looked like the state outline you see on tourist glassware. Impossible to be exactly the same, she told herself. The mind builds its own mirror. She stepped outside. The covered wagon display creaked a little as the wind moved through it. A metal sign beside it talked about distances traveled at 3 miles a day, and the way finding water reshaped the idea of risk. A small sheet of paper thumbtacked to the community board inside the lobby said a charity run would start in May. Someone had drawn a cartoon truck along the bottom for flair. It made her smile. Back on the interstate, she met the road with an intention that felt different. The next marker waited. She slowed as she came near. Not so much for safety as to force the moment to be exactly itself. Lambeitsischer. It stood there in the headlights like a fact that didn't mind being inspected. Renee didn't swear. She reached forward and clicked the radio on. Not to 19, not to anything, just to hear the soft fill of the world beyond her cab. For a while there was only a noise that felt like letting air out of a balloon. Then a voice came in as busted and distant as a song tuned in from another decade. It sounded like hers. Not the words. The cadence. "Don't chase it," the voice said. She left the dial alone. The voice did not return. The radio carried a weather report that was half a state off, and then fell back into its own small ocean. She clicked it off again and rolled on. The rest area sign announced itself with the same calm repetition. 2 miles. Renee nodded. "All right," she said. "We won't chase. We'll coast." Third time into Red Desert, she parked in a different slot. She counted the rectangle of light on the concrete beside the covered wagon. It looked 1 inch shorter. A silly thing to measure with the mind. The maintenance woman with the broom passed again. "Long night," she said in exactly the same friendly tone. Renee watched her boots for a moment, then looked up. "You say that to everybody?" "Only to the ones it fits," the woman answered, which was either nothing or everything. She smiled and pushed the broom toward a place that already looked swept. The cup in the machine again caught and then dropped. Renee stood with it in her hand longer than it took to drink it. She looked at the bulletin board. The charity run flyer had a fresh corner. A second cartoony truck had been added by a different pen, its lines lighter. She took out her clipboard and wrote a new note. If it loops, pause. At 2:13, count to 60. Leave something behind that isn't heavy. R. She laughed at the way it sounded like advice from a slower world. She pinned the note at the bottom of the board, not wanting to cover anyone else's stuff, and stepped back into the Wyoming night. In the truck, she shut down the engine completely. The silence that follows those big cylinders is a real thing. It has space inside it. The heater clicked in the cab like a polite knock. Once, then once more. She listened for a third, but it didn't come. She let the darkness rest in the corners and thought of all the nights she'd slept between miles, the way a person can dream in a little house they carry with them. Her analog watch ticked with the stubborn patience she loved it for. Above the windshield, a small charm on a string, a tiny bronze bird twisted toward stillness. She did not count to 60. She counted a slow 15. And then, because she felt the urge to act in some way, she took a quarter from the cup holder and slid it into a hairline crack in the bench by the covered wagon display. It lodged there halfway, just enough to say, "I was here." She did not expect magic. She liked a mark any future version of herself might see. Back up the ramp, the road received her again. If she had been the sort to pray over specifics, she might have asked the highway to change its mind. The marker ahead stood where it stood, stoic and green in the cold throw of her lamps. Lambalushizio, she breathed. She didn't whoop or clap or talk to nobody in gratitude. She let the relief spread like warmth from a heater vent. The minute hand of her watch admits the move to 2:14. For a full mile, she said nothing. Then she laughed, quietly, like someone agreeing with a good joke told by the dark. It would have been a small story if it ended there, but stories on the road are often long in subtle ways. A half hour later, the wind shifted. The radio murmured, and then offered a faint, doubled echo of her own breath, the way sound behaves in wide rooms. She passed a marker that declared 260. Then one that said 260 again. Not 270, not the same point. A different repetition, smaller, less insistent, like the highway clearing its throat. She didn't exit. There was no exit. The rest area wasn't between her and the next town anymore. She did what the distant voice had said. She didn't chase. She let the truck glide, a patient wait on a well-paved ribbon running across the world. The second 260 was indeed the second. The third became 259. The run unlocked itself with all the drama of a door that simply hadn't been latch-caught all the way. In Rock Springs, she stopped for fuel. The kind of stop a driver can do in a soaking rain without getting wet under the canopy. Because the building has learned where the wind goes. She paid, and the clerk slid a receipt across the counter. On the back of it, in the faint press of an earlier pen, like a transferred imprint, she could see the outline of letters that weren't meant for her. Pause. It looked accidental, like a scratch that made a word as it happened. The clerk had never offered her a lantern brochure, but there was one on a rack near the door with a small note. Take one, even if you think you won't use it. Renee took one. She slid it into the folder under her seat where she kept permits, because sometimes a charm was as good as a plan. For weeks after, when the hour drew toward 2, she paid attention the way one does to a place in a song you know by heart. Sometimes she passed the 270, and it stayed one. But sometimes a sign doubled itself, once at 224, once only with the little blue food symbol repeating between towns like someone had tapped copy. Each time, the solution wasn't an action so much as an attitude. She kept her breath low and easy. She quieted anything that buzzed. She let the road do the driving it always did. Twice she pulled off and left small harmless things, an old gas receipt folded into a star and tucked into the corner of a window ledge at a shuttered station. A quarter lodged where paint had lifted on a picnic table. A note that said, "It's okay to wait." Renee didn't talk about it much. She didn't need to be believed to believe it. At a way station, a man with a beard that looked like weather asked, "You ever get that thing where miles are twins?" He used the phrase like it came from somewhere older than him. She said, "Sometimes the road repeats itself to make sure you were paying attention." It felt like the right sentence. On a warm night outside Laramie, the radio carried chatter about cattle on a county road. Voices came and went like insects. She wasn't thinking of loops at all when Channel 19 cleared for a single phrase that marbled through like a ribbon, finding its own way among stones. It was her own tone again, unmistakable, not because she recognized the voice, but because the cadence carried private corners. "If you see the wagon, check the crack," it said. Then the channel filled back with ordinary talk. "Thanks, 10 to 4, weather over, exit whatever," like a tide coming in. She didn't change course. She didn't go seeking an echo of herself. But the next time Eatwadi took her past Red Desert, she stopped for coffee and walked to the covered wagon. The quarter she had slid into the seam was gone. In the tiny slick of the crack, someone had wedged a small card, the size of a fortune from a cookie, printed with a lantern, and a single word: "Thanks." Maybe the maintenance woman had found it and tidied it. Maybe it had shaken loose and someone had pocketed it. Maybe there was a drawer in the office with a handful of coins found by brooms and curious kids. Normal explanations worked fine in daylight, but nighttime held its own scale, and the shape of the thanks matched nothing else around it. The card wasn't a store's branding. It wasn't typed like the brochures. Ink felt like pen. Careful. Singular. Renee pinned the card to the community board under her note, so it wouldn't blow away. The charity run flyer had been replaced with a thank you note to donors. The 2 cartoon trucks had multiplied into a line of 3, as if they were driving off the page. She smiled, finished her cup in 3 patient swallows, and walked back to the rig. When the loop tried to tug at her again in Nevada this time, different desert, different temperature, she was ready in a way that didn't feel like bracing. She didn't hold herself tight waiting for a misstep. She watched for it, nodded when it happened, and made the small, kind choice she'd learned: halt if there was a place to halt, or coast if there wasn't. Let the night settle without insisting on forcing anything. The road yielded like a polite partner in a slow turn, and the next mile marker introduced itself as if they were meeting for the first time. Once, parking for a nap at a pullout with a view that was all space and stars, she saw, far across the median and 2 miles away, a tiny white point on a guardrail, a flashlight left burning on some small concrete work. It might have been nothing. It felt like everything had a way of nodding to everything else when the sun was out of the conversation. She turned off her dome light and let the tiny world of the cab hold her. The heater clicked twice, and then she slept like she'd put a good book back on its shelf. She keeps the analog watch wound, even in the age of atomic time and phones that know better. Sometimes at 2:13, the minute hand lingers on its mark as if looking at a familiar view. She waits with it, then it moves. And she moves with it, steady as a long breath. Somewhere along the way, she stopped deciding whether the loop had been a quirk or a kindness. It had taught her something gentle about pace and about the way the night likes to be treated, patiently, with room for an echo. When other drivers talk about strange stretches where nothing seems to line up, she listens and nods. If they want advice, she offers a simple practice. Pause. Count to a number that feels honest. If you can, leave a small sign that you saw the moment. The road notices. The road almost always lets you pass. Later, long after, she walked into a different rest area and saw a lantern icon printed small in the corner of a community notice. Nothing fancy, just a doodle. It was enough to make the skin along her arms wake up as if a cool draft had found it. The notice said in block letters, "If you know, you know." She folded a blank scrap in half, drew a tiny quarter on it, and pinned it beneath. There was no ritual to it, only a way of saying to others who counted miles, "Someone else has been here," with a little question at the edge of the map, and the night had an answer that wasn't loud but was good. Story number 3. Night along the spine of the Appalachians has a way of making everything feel older. The ridgelines stand like sleeping animals, and the highway threads between them with the hush of something taught to be careful. Jonah liked that. He liked the way the curve warnings shone like small moons, the way the low fog hung in hollows, the way his headlights painted guardrails into long silver ribbons. He was westbound on IF-81, empty sky above and freight in the box behind palleted paper, stacked square and strapped tight. Paper was a polite haul if you did it right. It rode quiet. It asked for attention to straps and to weather. Jonah kept both. He had been running since just after dusk, simply because the miles felt smoother then. The cab glowed a warm amber around him. His hands sat at 10 and 2, loose but honest. The radio was low, He preferred it that way when the road got the color of slate and the hills rose high on both sides. A sign announced Laurel Gap Safety Check in 2 miles. He knew the spot, a way station tucked into a carve-out of rock, a squat building with a window like an old post office. He'd passed it 100 times in daylight and at least 20 at night. It was rarely open after midnight. The open sign tended to sleep. He wasn't heavy. He had no reason to feel anything at that notice beyond the common habit of scanning his gauges, eyes moving the way they always did over air, temperature, volts, pressure. Everything was steady. Out ahead, the interstate tipped a little downhill and then leveled. The tires hummed the small tune they always did. That shoulder music that changed key with the pavement. At the crest of the next rise, he saw it. The way station sign glowed a simple, unblinking open. It didn't flash like it sometimes did during daylight, when the troopers wanted to be sure you saw it. It didn't stutter. It just burned. A second sign below it read, "All trucks next right." Jonah eased onto his blinker because that's what you do when you pass a sign that says what that one did. Even if a corner of your brain said, "Huh, that's unusual." He took the ramp. The slope led past rock walls that wore the night like a shawl. A chain-link fence ran along the edge with little reflectors that caught his headlights and returned them as gentle pinpricks. The building sat where it always did, low and pale, with a glass window facing the scale lane. A light shone above the window, a soft dome glow. The lane's own arrows were lit, telling him slow and then stop, in a measured sequence that felt almost like a voice. He rolled on. The scale read zeros, then scrambled for half a second as his steer axle crossed, then settled into numbers that made sense to a person who had learned the grammar of weight. He stopped where the paint told him to, exactly where hundreds of tires had made a darker rectangle. The slow, divided by stop board, went quiet. The light above the window burned soft. He looked for the shape of a person in the glass and saw none. That wasn't unheard of. Sometimes the night operator worked in back and watched from a screen. Sometimes a brake lined up with your arrival. He set his brake, felt the slight sag of the cab as the springs accepted the rest. A small printer on the outside wall made a noise like a cough, then fed a slip of paper out into the night. Jonah had never seen it do that without someone inside the booth. The paper was long and narrow, with the perforated edge that meant spooled. It rocked in the breeze and danced a little on the metal lip. He waited a second, then 2. Nothing else happened. He glanced at his mirrors, half expecting a wave to come from inside, a hand to slide into the rectangle of light. The window showed only his truck reflected in faint layer on faint layer. He could see the wine-colored stripe on his cab door, reversed. He could see the square of the trailer like a shadow of a shadow. He popped his door and climbed down. The air had that leaf smell the mountains keep even in winter. Like the planet under the pavement was reminding anyone who cared to listen that it was old and not in a hurry. His footsteps made a friendly, hollow sound on the concrete. When he reached the printer, the slip was long enough to tear. He did, cleanly, because tearing ragged would feel like talking over someone. He held the slip in his headlights. It was printed with a faint dot matrix pattern, old school, the kind of printout that belonged to another decade. His axle weights were there, and his gross, all of it in the ranges that matched his gauges. Under that, where he expected to see a date and timestamp, was a line of symbols he didn't recognize at first. It looked like someone had used all caps to print 4 wide characters, LOOK. He smiled because it was the reflex, the way a person smiles when a friend texts something unexpected at night. Then he looked up, because that, apparently, was what the slip wanted. The window reflected him. The building did not shift or wave. The only movement was the small swaying of the treetops beyond, their black lace against the softer black of the sky. He glanced along his rig the way he would in daylight for a level 1, eyes trained to tuck under trailers and along tires. A strap's tail tapped the trailer side with that little metallic flick that says something is almost right. He walked to the left rear, listening. The tap came again, a tiny thing that wouldn't wake someone sleeping feet away but that a driver notices because that's what he does. The last ratchet on the driver's side had a half-palm twist to it. It was visually tight, but there was the smallest bit of forgiveness in it, the sort that could grow lazy in cold air as the night made everything shrink. He lifted it, fed one more click into its teeth, and felt the strap draw a sigh tighter across the pallet corners. The tap disappeared. The trailer changed note, A little. Thank you, he said, not to the air exactly, and not to himself. A soft sound moved behind the glass. Not the shuffle of a person, more like a chair settling its weight after someone stands. The slow, divided by stop board, flicked to slow again, and then darkened. The printer did not cough. Jonah folded the slip and slid it into the chest pocket of his jacket. He walked back to the cab slowly, not dragging, just letting the moment file itself. His driver's seat felt extra warm after the cool as usual. He eased off the brake. The scale read his axles again and let him go without complaint. On the way back to the interstate, a small sign at eye level on the exit lane reflected his lamps. It was old, the paint a color that used to be bright. A lantern icon sat printed in the corner, simple lines making light out of shape. Under it, in tidy block letters, "Go easy." He merged back onto IE8E1. The traffic was light. The few tractors he saw were timelines unto themselves, each moving at a pace that matched an engine and a driver and a load. The mountains climbed and fell with disciplined grace. A white barn sat far up on a ridge like a throne someone forgot. Jonah watched his mirrors now and then, the way a person does after a strange intersection check, to see if the strangeness follows. It didn't. The highway resumed being what it had been. A long, patient thing made of poured stone and lines that told the truth. At the next truck stop, he pulled in for fuel. The canopy lights pushed the night back in a tidy circle. He filled both tanks and listened to the click of the pump. Inside, a sleepy clerk scanned his rewards card and asked how the road was. Smooth, Jonah said. It was the word that felt accurate in both directions. There was a corkboard near the restrooms with the usual collage, a yard sale flyer with a rip-off phone number tag, a business card for a mobile wrecker, a handwritten thank you from a local youth team taped up crooked. A photo in a cheap frame hung slightly off to one side, not trying to be art. It showed a small crew of way station staff standing in front of a low building with a window and a dome light that could have been any of a dozen outposts along a highway. But Jonah recognized the shape. Laurel Gap. Everyone in the photo wore jackets with the state patch. An older man in the middle held up a brass lantern like it was a trophy. The caption written in pen along the frame's edge said, "Farewell to Night Shift, March 2000. A placard below the corkboard, typed in the way small places type things, read, "Laurel Gap safety check is closed nights due to budget, open sporadically. For assistance call." The number had been retaped twice with neat care. Someone had drawn a small lantern next to it with a ballpoint. Jonah stood there longer than there was a reason to. Then he nodded like a person does after a story, and he walked back out into the bright circle beneath the canopy and then into the softer dark on the other side. The folded slip in his pocket had weight only because he knew it was there. He took it out in the cab and set it in the little space near the shifter, where he kept toll receipts and small objects that weren't done being thought about. The letters on it looked like they did in the scale light. LOOK. The zeros in his axle weights were printed with the same dot matrix stubbornness, as if tiny pixels had been told to stand in their formation and were proud to do it. He drove on. The night gave him what many nights do. 3 deer far off to the right that changed their minds and stayed where they were. A pickup that drifted over the line and corrected, and then drifted again before taking the next exit as if guided by a hand he couldn't see. Fog low like someone had poured milk into a ditch and left it there to think. Jonah kept his breath even. He thought of the lantern in the photograph and the small sign at the exit with the icon. He'd noticed lanterns more often lately, not because they were common who uses lanterns as symbols now, but because they seemed to be sitting quietly in corners, a whisper of an older rule. 3 nights after, on another run in the same region, his route took him past Laurel Gap again, later this time, past 3. He didn't expect the open sign. He expected a sleeping station, a dark window, the dome off. The interstate gave him the same sign he'd had before, all trucks. Next right. Except this time, the smaller digital board beneath had a single word in pixel squares. Bypass. The main sign stayed dark. He could have skipped the ramp. Good practice said, obey the closest, most current sign. He stayed in his lane and let the station slide by on his right. A single amber light glowed over the empty scale lane. And as he swung past, the printer on the wall did its cough into nobody's night. He felt it more than heard it. like remembering a sound a second after it happens. He kept his eyes forward. The interstate held him. At the truck park where he shut down near dawn, two drivers at a counter were telling stories in the way drivers do when their engines are cooling and their coffee is getting cold. "They closed Laurel at night, right?" one said, scratching at a lottery ticket with a key. "Been closed years except when they borrow it for training," the other answered. He wore a denim jacket with a patch on the elbow, a neat repair that made the garment better. Old man who ran nights back in the 90s used to leave notes on slips if he wanted to tell you something without knocking you off schedule. Little words like check, left, or look. Old boy had the lightest step you ever saw. "Notes on the slip?" the first one said. "I never got one." "You did if you needed it," the second said. He smiled into his cup. "He passed a long time ago. I still look when I see that window." Habit. Jonah sipped his own coffee and let the conversation rest where it landed. He considered showing the slip and decided against it. Not because he didn't trust the room, because the room didn't need it to be real to treat it as true. He liked that about the road. On a cool morning a week later, he stopped in daylight at a picnic pull-off that he had only ever seen in the dark. It sat 4 miles beyond Laurel Gap, a little rectangle of asphalt facing a view that was all green and blue in distance. A bulletin box with a hinged plexiglass door held a map of the regional highway system for reasons that made sense to the person who'd put it there, and behind the map, in the cardboard seam, someone had tucked a small card. Jonah opened the box and brought the card forward without removing it. Printed on it was that simple lantern icon and a line. "If you pass safely, pass it on." He closed the box and left the card where it wanted to be. He took a pen from his pocket. Drivers always have a pen on them, and wrote, on a corner of a gas receipt, 2 words neat as he could manage with cold hands. "Good looking out." He slid the receipt behind the map with the card. A fair exchange. From then on, whenever he rolled near Laurel Gap after midnight, he watched the signs, not with the hunger of a person waiting for magic, but with the patience of one who knows. Patience sometimes gets rewarded with a small kindness. Sometimes the station was dark. Sometimes the open sign glowed. Twice he took the ramp. Once the slow divided by stop board printed EAC, and once it printed check lights, and he found a marker lamp that had gone dark because a wire had shrugged loose. He didn't ask how a machine without a person in front of it had decided to tell him. He liked the feeling of a system older than him, and kinder than it had to be keeping an eye on the little things. The slip with "look" lived folded in his logbook sleeve. He touched it when he reached for pens. It felt like a little brass coin in a pocket, ordinary and weighted and slightly warmer than paper had any business being. On a later day, when he was fueling 2 states away, a woman at the next island tapped her pump with a knuckle and said to no one in particular, "Sometimes the night leaves you a note and you better read it." Jonah saw a sticker on her box hand. Drawn, a lantern that had seen a photocopier. He wanted to ask, decided he didn't have to. He lifted a hand in hello, as if he were signaling over a quiet, miles-long median. She lifted her hand back, and that was all. The Appalachian ridges kept their shapes. The fog kept its low beds. The highway kept doing the job men and women built it for. And now and then, past midnight, a small building with 1 window and a dome light did a small job too. It coughed out slips that put 1 word where a person would see it and do what it said. Nothing in it was sharp. Nothing in it was loud. It was the gentlest kind of unsettling, the kind that makes you aware of your own hands, your own habits, your own foot on the brake. When newcomers asked him about the oddest things he'd seen, he let them have their fun about lights in the woods and deer that looked at you like they'd read your mail. Then he told them a simple story about a way station that might not have been staffed but that was working anyway, and how he was glad for the old machinery of it, and how sometimes a message coming from a machine without a voice sounded more like a person than anything. If they laughed, he laughed. If they nodded, he nodded. And if they said, "What do you do about it?" he offered the small practice he'd learned after midnight in the high country. You look when someone tells you to look. You check the left. You go easy. You leave something kind behind. And somewhere along a ramp off I-81, a building keeps its lonely light. Sometimes the open sign glows. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a printer clears its throat for no one and gives a driver enough words to turn a strap 1 more click. It's not a choir, not a shout, not a flashing warning. It's a lantern drawn in the corner of a sign and a slip of paper saying, in a voice that is not a voice at all, through old dots making new letters, L-O-O-K. Story number 4. The river gorge at night breathed like a sleeping animal. Wind slid along the basalt walls in long sighs, then pressed cold over the water, until ripples turned to thin, black glass. On the Washington side, where the highway followed the river's shoulder, the lanes were narrow and the guardrail felt closer than daylight admitted. Alma liked that feeling in a patient way. The closeness kept her honest. She had a box trailer behind her, loaded with nursery stock, small trees, shrubs, trays of tiny green that would become hedges in new neighborhoods. The cargo liked a calm ride. Alma was good at calm. Her headlights washed the rock face ahead in steady white, turning reflectors into brief sparks. Freight trains moved on the Oregon bank like low-lit cities changing address. Sometimes, when the gorge breathed right, you could hear a horn roll down the water and fold itself around the cliffs. The radio was low. The dash glowed a soft amber, gauges steady at the middle of everything. Orange signs began to appear, their messages repeating with measured politeness. Road work ahead. 1 lane. Pilot car follow me. Alma checked the time, 2:18, and glanced at the traffic screen on her phone mount. It showed the usual overnight pattern. A slow patch marked by cones where crews had been shoring up a slope for weeks. She had planned for a minor delay. She had not expected a pilot car this late, but the gorge ran on rules that didn't ask permission from schedules. The wind made the pines shake their needles gently. An overhead sign reflected back her lamps and declared in all caps, "Expect delays. Use caution." The merge began. Cones did their patient line dance. She settled into first position, no other rigs ahead of her and none close behind. When the arrow board at the taper flashed left lane closed, she moved right and let the truck find 25 without being asked. No pilot car idled at the mouth of the work zone. No pickup with an orange light bar sat warming on the shoulder. Alma rolled to the stop here line and did as told. The river sounded closer when a truck stopped. Without tire noise, everything else came forward. She set her brake and watched the sweep of her headlights shudder along the cones. She waited. The CB whispered and then fell still. The air felt clean and older than plastic. Something moved around the far bend aglow, not bright. Not the candy blue of LED or the hard white of a flashlight. It was a warmer color, a small amber disc that bobbed like it was suspended from a hand. It rounded the curve at a walking pace, and then a slow roll. Behind it, darkness. No hood lights, no marker lamps, just the circle itself, steady and patient. Alma kept her brakes set because that was the practice. If someone wanted to get her attention, they'd do it in a way she could mistake for nothing else. The glow came forward and resolved into sense, an old lantern swaying from a bracket that seemed to rise from nothing. It stopped beside the pilot car sign and held still. There was no figure. There was only the lantern, and the quiet insistence of its light saying, in a way older than words, "Come along now." Slowly, she felt the instinct to deny what she saw, to rename it. Maybe the lantern hung under a bumper she couldn't see. Maybe the car's markers were broken. Maybe the work lights beyond were soaking the air and making tricks out of beams. She put her hand on the shifter and kept her eyes level. She lifted the brake. The lantern moved as if responding to the sound of air releasing, then drifted forward along the cones and took the corridor that only a pilot car was supposed to take. Alma followed. The lane narrowed. You could tell by how the reflectors changed tone under your lamps, when they piled up and thinned out like they were being poured from a bag. She rode the stripe with the care of a person carrying something sleeping. The lantern set a pace that settled into her bones, a little under 20. It paused before each blind fold in the rock, the way a careful person steps into a room and looks around. When it moved, it swung in a slow, even pattern, like a pendulum that had been doing this a long time and didn't mind. The pilot route deviated from what her app showed as the work zone. It slid right along a set of temporary barricades, and then gently down onto a surface that sounded different under her steer tires. The hum changed from poured stone to something with grain in it, boards. A temporary bridge or decking laid across a cut. The smell reached her through the cracked side vent. Creosote and old timber warmed by friction, like a wharf you might walk at evening at low tide. Minus the salt. The CB coughed static. Out of habit, she swung through the channels with a thumb, but everything was quiet, as if the gorge itself had turned down its volume for this. She didn't ask if anyone else saw the light. She knew what drivers did with questions that crowded the air. They let them sit. The river leaned up to the shoulder and peered over like a quiet neighbor. On the rock wall, a signboard from an earlier phase of the project was still strapped where someone had left it. It showed a rendering of a slope held by a net and a caption with a date from 2 winters ago. In the corner of the board, a small icon had been printed, a lantern, the simplest line drawing, the kind a person could sketch with a pen if they wanted to mark something without saying much. Alma had seen that shape in other places at odd times lately. It gave her no reasons, only a feeling that wasn't unkind. The lantern ahead slowed and then stopped at the edge of a narrow truss. Alma knew the truss, but not this narrow. In daylight, it was a 2-laner with forgiveness in it. Now, with the deck pulled up on one side for work, it looked like a piano with half its keys removed. The lantern's glow rested on a small concrete post. For a moment, it did not move. The light did a soft-bodied breathing in its glass like it had a heart. She waited, eyeing how her trailer would clear the girders. The nurseries behind her would prefer she not test the boundary between sidewall and bolt. A gentle sound came through the night air, a release of pressure, a sigh the size of a truck applying and lifting a brake somewhere close by. The lantern held still. The sound came again, nearer, and a presence larger than a pickup brushed the air on the far side of the truss. Wind shifted along the deck. The feeling wasn't a draft from a visible machine, but the shape of something moving through space. Alma could have convinced herself it was the river adjusting to a gust, except the pattern of that breeze matched the rhythm of a driver easing through at a crawl. She had felt that rhythm too often to mistake it. She put her palm flat on the wheel and waited. 1 minute, 2. The lantern lifted from the post without a hand and floated forward onto the decking. It advanced just enough to show her the first boards, then eased on as if keeping time to a pulse in the gorge itself. She crossed, slow as a thought. The boards talked up through her tires. A soft bum-bum-bum that matched the plank seams. She kept her trailer centered and held the wheel the way you hold a sleeping child, firm enough to protect, loose enough not to wake. On the downstream side, the rail wore old paint layered under new like the rings in a tree trunk. Someone had carved a small shape in it years ago, and paint had tried and failed to hide it. It wasn't letters. It was a simple lantern. The decking ended, and modern asphalt took her up again, seamless and black like a new suit. The cones changed species. Old weighted rubber became bright plastic. The lantern kept its pace for another long bend, then drifted right toward a maintenance turnout that looked older than the lane. It hung there at the mouth of the turnout for a full breath, as if it were waiting to be sure she was still with it, then eased into the dark between firs and stood. It lifted once in a small acknowledgement, a nod, if light could nod, and then thinned to nothing like a firefly deciding to be night rather than fire. Alma rolled forward alone until a sign as bright and modern as a phone screen announced end road work. Speed limit signs looked young again. She exhaled. She had not realized how still her breath had been. 10 miles ahead, a travel plaza announced itself with a tall pylon and a bank of soft white under canopy lights. She pulled in not because she needed fuel, but because a body sometimes needed proof that fluorescent had not vanished from the world. Steam rose from the coffee machines. A cooler hummed. The clerk wore a knit hat and offered a receipt with 2 hands, a small courtesy. They chatted about wind and trains and the possibility of snow by morning. When Alma mentioned the pilot car, the clerk looked over her shoulder toward the windows and then back at her kindly, as if checking whether she was joking. Road crews close the lane at night, the clerk said, but they don't run pilot after midnight anymore. They say it's too hard on staffing. If they shut it down after 11, they leave it till morning. You got through? I did, Alma said. Lucky timing then, the clerk offered, not trying to explain anything away. He pointed toward a bulletin board where community notices made their overlapping crowd. In among the flyers for a school fundraiser and a hand-lettered ad for chain installation, there was a laminated photo. Men in hard hats stood in a line along the skeleton of a temporary bridge. Faces turned toward a camera someone had balanced on a barricade. In the center, a foreman held a lantern, a brass-bodied, glass-sided thing, with the same pride a person might hold a new baby. The caption below it, typed and then retyped at some point when the ink had gone thin, said, "Temporary span, after the 98 slide. Thanks to night crews who led trucks across one at a time. Pace saves lives." The photo had been taken in daylight. The lantern was unlit. Still, Alma felt a small warmth in her chest, the kind that shows up when the world happens to line up long enough to make a thread visible. She bought a triangle sandwich and 2 bottles of water and a pack of those peanut butter crackers that can tenderness a long hour. When she stepped back into her cab, the gorge was a shape beyond the edge of the lights. She ate 2 crackers slowly and put the rest in the dash tray. Out the windshield, the highway lay like a lacquered ribbon. In the morning, daylight found all the surfaces that night had smoothed. The basalt was 100 colors. The river wore its sunlight plainly. On her return trip 2 days later, she saw the work zone with the clean, practical lines of daylight, cones, arrows. A truck with a crane arm folded like a bird. The narrow truss stood open in both lanes. No temporary decking was visible. Her route app showed nothing unusual. At the narrow maintenance turnout where the lantern had eased away, there was only a closed gate and a sign that said, "Authorized vehicles only." Its corners lifted a fraction where wind had insisted. Alma pulled off at a scenic point where an interpretive plaque explained the geology better than most people could. The wind was gentle. A man in a yellow DOT vest stood taking a sip of coffee from a thermos, watching the river like it was a TV that had forgotten to be loud. Alma asked casually, "You ever hear of pilot cars running overnight here?" "Years back," he said. He had the easy voice of a person who spent time outdoors. "We used to do it with pickups and a light bar. Before that, before my time, they say the boss walked ahead with a lantern when the power's out, or when the bridge is on temporary decking. Different rules now." He tipped his head at the highway. "These days we shut it and sleep and bring folks through in the Sunday safer mostly. You roll through at night?" "Last run." Alma looked at the truss, which now seemed wider than any night had told her. Felt like a throwback. "Gorge likes to keep its old ways handy," he said, not making a story out of it. He screwed the lid back on his thermos with 2 quick turns. If the wind talks, you listen. If the river goes quiet, you check upstream. If a lantern tells you to slow down, you slow down, even if nobody's holding it. He said this as if it were regular advice, the kind you'd find on the back of a napkin taped to a service window. Be kind. Return carts. Trust the small lights. She drove on with the river at her elbow. The overnights that followed were quieter than the story wanted, which is how safe nights behave. Once, in fog thick as feathers, she rolled up to the same merge and found the arrow board dark and the barricade pulled across the lane with a polite stop sign hanging from its neck. She set her brake and listened to the way fog graduates the world into layers. The radio murmured, then hushed. Nothing moved. Somewhere ahead, a rock sounded like a slow drum, not close but not imaginary. The river made a deeper note in reply. The way water does, when it has to teach weight how to be water for a few seconds. Alma sipped from her thermos and let the heater knock once and again without asking for a third. A minute passed. Then the amber circle appeared, low to the road and moving like a hand. It didn't startle. It didn't wave. It existed. It came to the barricade and held. A soft clack sounded, as if a latch had learned how to open itself. The stop sign tilted inward, and the barricade rolled just enough to let her through. She followed the glow. The air smelled like wet stone and fur. The light asked no questions, and answered none. It took her along the lane, and then around a quiet sweep where newly fallen gravel had migrated into a gentle drift. Without the lantern, her own lamps would have shown it. But the light's path made it easier to choose a line that didn't throw a stone against her soft trailer wall. There was a small comfort in that, the difference between doing something and doing it well. At the end of the zone, the barricade across the far lane waited, still latched, not rolled. The lantern bobbed to the shoulder. Alma eased by. In her mirror, the circle of light lifted once and then dimmed until it was the same shade as fog. She moved into clear air. In half a mile, she could see stars again, erased and rewritten, like chalk on a board wiped by a hand that didn't want to be seen. She told no one loud. She didn't keep it secret either. That week, at a table in a quiet diner with windows that looked toward town, a driver mentioned a stretch of road where cones had felt wrong in the night. Too narrow, too close. Alma said, "Sometimes something old will lead you through. If it shows up, keep your pace low and your hands light. Don't try to pass it, and don't lag far enough to lose it." The driver laughed, but the laugh didn't hold a joke. "A pilot car without a car," he said. He set his cup down and looked out at nothing in particular. Wouldn't that be something? On a later run, she stopped at a pullout where someone had mounted a weatherproof box with postcards of the gorge for tourists who were still up when dawn met their exhausted joy. Tucked under the stack, there was a small card, no bigger than a business note. On it, hand-drawn in tidy lines, the small lantern shape she'd seen around lately. Below it, "Pace saves lives." Someone had added, in pen, smaller, "If you know, follow me." She slid a spare red reflector disc, one of the little stick-on ones used on toolbox doors, into the box beside the card. It wasn't much. It felt like the right weight to leave behind. Back at the truck, she opened the dash cubby and took out a palm-sized amber beacon she'd bought weeks ago for work sites, the kind you could set on a barrel to ask people to be gentle. She clicked it on and set it on her dash when she ran fog or falling rock zones. She didn't pretend to be a pilot car. She didn't speed up. She didn't slow down the world to a crawl. She let the little light say what lights say, quietly. Here we are, moving through together. One night, a pickup tucked in behind her at a merge and let her lead. In the mirror, she saw its driver ease shoulders and do that steering wheel stretch people do when they decide to settle in for a stretch with a steady lead. Another time, a rig fell in single file behind, far enough back to be respectful, close enough to be comforted. When the zones ended, the pickup flashed its headlights. A simple hello and thanks. The rig gave her a soft double tap of the marker lights. She answered with her own, twice. No language, all language. The gorge kept breathing. The basalt held its cool counsel. The river told its low stories to the dark. Somewhere in the hours when night is most itself, a circle of amber would appear at the edge of a closed lane and wait until a driver lifted a brake and trusted it. It would keep a careful pace past timber and rock, and a trust that felt narrower under stars than under Sunday. Then it would step aside into fir shadow and vanish like a word you only hear when you need it. Alma kept her hands light on the wheel and her pace even. She didn't name it beyond calling it the night pilot in her notes, a small line on a clipboard that meant only what it meant to her. She slept well after such crossings, as if a task older than permits and planned detours had been done correctly and quietly. When she rolled into daylight, she found she had no urge to argue whether what she'd seen was a trick of fog and memory or a kindness with copper and glass in it. She looked where she was going, and she went where the road allowed. And when a small lantern appeared on a bulletin board in some other town, drawn in someone else's quick lines, she felt a calm she didn't try to hold too tightly. The road had a way of repeating itself when it wanted to be sure you know it. The light, when it came, simply asked for care and company at 10, at 15, at 20 miles an hour, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just the right pace to make it to morning. Story number 5. The high pass east of Vale turns the night into a narrow tunnel of snow and sound. Wind moves like breath across the cut faces of rock, then pours down into the lanes until the road looks soft and alive. Luis preferred winter runs when everyone else avoided them, not because he loved danger, he didn't, but because winter made everything honest. You could hear every change in the road through the steering wheel, feel every sentence the tires wanted to say. His trailer carried produce, gentle freight that liked the reefer set to a clear, even number. The unit murmured behind him, steady as a cat purring in another room. Chains rode in a tub beneath the steps, oiled and ready. The sky kept its stars, but the pass rode its own weather clouds unrolled and folded back like someone adjusting a blanket. He had salt on his windshield edges, a bottle of washer fluid in reach, and a thermos that still held a little heat. The CB was low. The lane markers were half buried, and then found again by retro reflectors that blinked like watchful eyes. It was late enough that the usual stream of westbound headlights had quieted. Snow whispered along the shoulders and lifted a little in the wake of his tractor, as if everything wanted to dance and was being polite about it. Chain up ahead, the sign said in clean white letters. Chains required when flashing. The lights weren't flashing. The next advisory board rolled out its simple courtesy: slower traffic, keep right. He did, easing into the less ambitious groove. His speed settled just above 30. A dark shape of a plow far ahead pushed a wide fan that glowed in the work lights, then sunk into black again like a whale diving. The chain-up area at the next turnout was lit with a sodium orange that turned the whole world into a photograph from the 70s. A few rigs sat nose out. Men and women clamped under fenders with bungees in their teeth, making neat patterns of steel around rubber. Luis passed at a pace that respected their work. A sign nailed to a utility pole on the far side of the lot said, "Call when closed in tidy, leftover letters." Above it, a metal box the color of old mustard stood on a post at shoulder height. He glanced at it because anything vertical in the night asks for a second of attention. Someone had taped "out of service" across its door in peeling duct tape. A little window revealed nothing but black inside. As he idled by, the box rang. Not a modern chirp, not the flat buzz of a cheap intercom. It rang like a telephone rings when movies want you to know a phone is ringing. A small bell with a clear throat. Luis glanced at the mirrors, the shoulder, the turnout. No one stood by the post. Snow sifted like confetti around it, gathering at its base. He might have gone on if the ring had stopped. It rang again, evenly spaced, calm, like it had waited its turn, and now it was the time. He pulled into the turnout. The reefer hummed. The windshield wipers clucked once in their sleep. He set his brake and watched his own headlights throw a patient trapezoid onto the box. The out-of-service tape looked old and faithful. The ring came a third time. He climbed down. Cold wind walked around his ankles. Snow made small needles along his cuffs. He crossed the lane and put a gloved hand on the post because sometimes what your hand says differs from what your eyes do. The metal felt colder than the air, the way things that remember winter longer always do. He opened the little door because why not? Inside was a handset you'd expect to find in a museum, black, smooth, a mouthpiece like a friendly donut. The cord hung in a curve. A tiny amber bulb above it glowed, as if before electricity got loud it had been content to be this small. He lifted the handset and said, "Because a person has to say something first." "Yeah." Static came, then cleared. The voice that arrived was simple and unhurried, and not interested in being identified. "Hold for the fourth," it said. "Fourth what?" "Plow," the voice said. The word was padded with a tone that had traveled a long way to get to him, as if he was listening through a wall that wasn't in front of him. He looked up the grade. Far ahead, something flashed, and then fell back behind a curve. The road between him and that light was a dapple of compacted stripes and patches of powder. On some nights you could see the texture of the snow the way you can read the grain in wood. On this night, it had all been brushed into a hush. "Copy," he said, because he couldn't think of a better word. "Why the fourth?" A small smile pressed into the voice without ever becoming a laugh. "First, 3 clear. Fourth holds. You'll want its pace." The handset was warm, he realized. Not a fever. Just a human temperature that shouldn't have been in metal that cold. "Who's this?" he asked gently. Static pressed, then let go. "Hold for the fourth," the voice repeated, as if that were enough. Then the line clicked empty, not with drama but with finality, like a book shutting. Luis stood with the handset near his ear for a second longer than it took to understand the call was over. He returned it to the hook and closed the box. Wind snuck down the back of his collar and told him he wasn't young anymore. He climbed back up into his cab, where the blower had already made a pocket of warmth, and set his hands where they belonged. The first plow announced itself with a low rumble and a crown of snow that folded off its blade. It passed the turnout with a confidence that belonged to something heavier than it looked. He watched it in his mirror, the red lights on its back making a string of beads. The second came 2 minutes later, a different rhythm, closer to the line. The third arrived with an escort of pickup chain control moving like a small planet around it, and swept the right lane like it had somewhere else to be. Luis felt the urge to move, the way a person does when a momentum suggests itself. He waited. The fourth plow came slower, older in its posture. Its lights were amber, not blue-white. The pattern on its bar was a simple bar, not a choreographed dance. It moved with the humility of a working animal. On the back of the blade housing, someone had stenciled a tiny image with a paintbrush, and the paint had worn away along edges where snow liked to scrape. It was a lantern, nothing more. A square, a handle, a little suggestion of glow. The fourth passed. Luis let the air out of his brakes and fell in behind it at a respectful distance. The plow set an easy 25 and would not be rushed. He watched its blade throw snow off the right edge, saw the edge of the asphalt appear, saw the wheel lines sharpen into something a person could trust with weight. Half a mile up, the slope on the right lifted into a cut that had been carved by men and then refined by weather. Snow had feathered into that cut and made a beautiful, dangerous pillow. As the plow crossed under it, the pillow let go all at once. It didn't slide with violence. It came down like someone setting a comforter on a bed. Behind the plow, the lane turned white to the height of the guardrail, a neat wall where there had been road. Luis would have been under that if not for the old machine and its stubborn pace. He tightened his hands on the wheel and then loosened them, like resetting a grip on a tool that needed finesse. They rolled. The fourth never looked back because machines don't, and because it was a better teacher that way. Luis followed it through a section where the wind came sideways and tried to persuade him to wander, and then across a bit of road where someone had left a little pile of gravel that was either a help or a hazard, depending on the tire and the moment. The plow made everything simpler by being there. At a break in the median, the old machine lifted its blade and eased into the crossover like a whale changing lanes. It paused for a breath, as if it knew he needed a cue that this was where they parted, then angled its front toward the downhill and vanished behind a ribbon of falling snow. Luis tapped his dash in a little salute he'd never done for a person he couldn't see. Then he climbed the last bit of the pass like a person taking the last 3 steps to a porch. On the far side, the air warmed by 1 small degree that felt like a blessing. The road widened. The next chain-up area was a sleeping village of cones and signs. He kept going until the stars felt less like distant lamps and more like companions. At a service plaza, he pulled in and let the reefer talk to itself while he stretched a shoulder and bought coffee from a machine that made a little song out of steam. The bulletin board by the restrooms was full of the ordinary lost dog, room for rent by the week, somebody's guitar for sale with stickers that told their own long road. Tucked between 2 flyers was a snapshot, one of those glossy prints you get from a drugstore kiosk. It showed a row of plows like orange fish, in a line, their noses facing the same way, a mountain behind. A date at the bottom read 2004. On the last plow in the row, a lantern had been stenciled. Someone had circled it in pen, not hard, just so your eyes would know where to look. Below, a scrap of paper taped to the board said in ballpoint, "Hold for the 4th." A little arrow pointed to the lantern. Luis touched the edge of the snapshot like you might touch a relic in a museum you didn't mean to find. He didn't take the picture down. He didn't need to. The next week, a storm met him on the west side near Silverthorne. He'd planned his run to miss the worst of it. Weather had different plans. Snow filled the night with a turnout of its own. He drove into a pocket where flakes turned to tiny spinning mirrors. The road went from obvious to uncertain in half a mile. The advisory sign flashed. Chains required. He pulled into a chain-up, the reefer's hum making music under the wind. Men and women fitted steel to rubber in a ballet of gnarled fingers and practiced hooks. Luis strung 1 axle a chain each because that was the rule, and because the sound of chains is a song that calms the heart when the road tries to talk too fast. On the pole beside him, a box rang. He had not seen it until it called him. Out-of-service tape crossed the door just as before, shrugged at by a few winters. He opened it and lifted the same kind of handset and said, "Yeah." It felt courteous to address it that way now. The voice was unhurried. "4th again," it said. "When you pull out, stay to the right of your right." He frowned and smiled at the same time. "Say again?" "Right of your right," the voice repeated, warm and steady. "You'll know it when you see it." Then the line went gentle and empty. Luis finished his chain work, checked everything with his usual care, and pulled to the shoulder. The first 3 plows came with the authority of a parade that had been scheduled for months. He waited. The 4th came like a nod between old friends. He fell in behind it, and when the lane shifted around a bent, a low drift had taken the left and tried to take the right. But some earlier pass had left a slim trough on the far edge of the right lane, the right of the right, a little seam where rubber had kept to a habit. The plow layered that seam with new clarity. Luis eased his steer tires into it. The pickup in the mirror did the same. To anyone who hadn't been told, it would have looked like he were hugging the ragged edge unnecessarily. To him, it felt like stepping into the priority line for safety. After the summit, the plow lifted its blade and was swallowed by a curtain of snow that didn't disturb it. Luis rolled on into the valley, where the lights were a town and then a smaller town, and then fields resting under their white quilts. He slept at a quiet truck stop where the night clerk had wrapped a scarf around a coffee machine, as if it were a person, and the idea made both of them warmer. Sometimes a strange night happens once, and you can put it on a shelf in your mind and let it sit there like a souvenir. This one didn't ask to be shelved yet. Twice more that month, in different weather, the call boxes rang at the right moment. Once in clear cold with a glare ice that would have happily moved rubber in directions it didn't plan to go. Once in heavy wet snow that was so generous, it gave you more winter than you ordered. Each time, the voice advised something simple. Hold for the fourth. Ease down to the wide hands. Let the curve do its job. He asked the voice a few questions. Who are you? Where are you? How many drivers get this call? The answers were not withheld out of meanness. They were simply not available, like a line that only carries a certain frequency. At a scales house near Gypsum, he showed his clean inspection to a trooper with gentle eyes and asked, as casually as a person can, "Those call boxes on the pass, they still in service?" "Most are dead," the trooper said. He shifted his weight like his boots, and the floor were old friends. Emergency communications gone to cell and to roadside beacons. We keep a few live for nostalgia over on the museum shelf. He gestured toward a pamphlet, History of the Pass, and there on the cover was a photograph of a line of plows from years before, a lantern on the last one drawn in with a pen by someone who had needed the symbol to be brighter. At a diner at dawn, two drivers talked about nights that felt longer than the clock. One mentioned how his father had told him to never outrun the plow, especially the old one, he'd said, as if that were a specific animal in a book of animals. Another said the old one used to be a person. He didn't elaborate. Sometimes the thing you don't say is the story, not the part you do. Luis left small courtesies in places where a person might need a yes. He jammed a folded thank you in the seam of a call box door. He tucked a fresh pack of chemical hand warmers into the cable wrap on a pole at a chain up. In spring, when the pass opened its shoulders and let the road breathe without slush or grit, he pulled into the turnout where he had first heard the ring. The box was there. Sun painted it into a color that looked less like mustard and more like gold. The tape said, "Out of service but let go at a corner." He opened the door. The handset was present, patient. It didn't ring. It didn't have to. Inside, on the tiny shelf that used to hold written instructions for the old road, someone had left a card the size of a business note. On it, a small lantern had been sketched in pen with care. Below the lantern, a single word, "Thanks." He placed his palm on the card without moving it, and let the warmth of his hand be the message he left. Then he closed the door and tightened the tape a little so it wouldn't flap in wind. Summer changed the pass into a different animal. Asphalt loosened under heat. The reefer worked harder to keep produce cool. Night smelled like sage higher up, like hot diesel lower down. Luis drove through the same places and didn't expect the old ring. He didn't need it. But sometimes he thought he heard, under the hum of the engine and the whir of a fan, the distant bell of a small phone making itself heard through weather and distance and time. He kept his pace kind. He gave the road the respect it asked for, which was the same respect it had always asked for in any season. Attention, patience, company. When he told the story in the right company, he left it plain. In the pass, a call box rang. A voice said, "Hold for the fourth." He held for the fourth. He did fine. He didn't give the voice a name. He didn't make the old machine into anything it wasn't. He let the details be mild because the truth had its own chill. One night in a different state with a different mountain, he rolled into a chain-up at 2 in the morning and found a phone box that didn't look like any he'd seen before. It was new, with a glass door and a blue beacon that glowed even when nothing else did. He touched the handle, and it beeped at him in a digital language. He didn't open it. On the frame, someone had stuck a small sticker of a lantern, hand-drawn, crooked, like a secret handshake. He laughed once, a good laugh that didn't need witnesses. Maybe it was a club, maybe it was not. On the last night of a wet spring, descending the pass after hauling early fruit to Denver, he saw, Far below and far ahead, a small amber bar moving at a slow, even pace. He guessed it without needing to squint. Fourth, busy being itself. He gave it space with his hands and his foot. He had learned the rhythm now. No heroics, no rush, no theater, just the quiet, humble relay of care that winter, and sometimes even summer, asks from anyone heavy and honest. If you asked him when the call boxes would stop ringing, he'd shrug and say maybe they never had, maybe he was new to their timetable. If you pressed him for the strangest part, he'd say the ring had sounded exactly like a landline in an old house, a sound that brings the rest of the house to attention. He'd say a thing that may not be alive can be awake. He'd say the road knows how to pass a message along if enough people ask kindly. He keeps his chains oiled. He keeps the reefer neat. He keeps an extra pair of gloves in the door for someone who forgot theirs. He keeps, folded small under the dash, the little card with a hand-drawn lantern and the word that needs no reply. When snow comes, and it will, he watches the grate ahead, listens for the quiet bell under the wind, and waits as long as it takes. The fourth will come when it's ready, and when it does, he'll be there. Story number 6. The causeway across the swamp looked endless at night, a concrete ribbon lifted just high enough to skim the tops of trees that grew out of water. Out beyond the rail, cypress knees stood like candles in a drowned cathedral, and the bayou breathed in a chorus, frogs calling, insects zinging, the low complaint of a heron that sounded like a door hinge in a lonely house. Silas liked this run across Ewik 10. He liked the way the bridge kept his world simple: 2 lanes, no shoulders to speak of, guardrail close, stars overhead when the fog allowed. He hauled spools of cable bound in bands and chalk tight, a load that behaved if he did. The reefer wasn't part of this trip. The trailer trailed quiet as a shadow. Signs before the climb reminded him of the rules that belonged to this stretch. No. Stopping on bridge. Speed limit strictly enforced. When flashing, tune to 1,610 AM. Tonight the beacons weren't flashing. The air had the soft damp that made headlights look like they were thinking. He checked his mirrors, eased to 55, and let the tires hum that smooth pitch the bridge always gave. A second set of signs named the exits he would not see for miles. Whiskey Bay, Butte, La Rose. They sounded like stories you tell on porches, not places on a map. Silas didn't use his CB much here. It made him feel like he was shouting in a library. He turned it down and reached for the AM dial, because that was a habit from long nights years ago when a ball game and static could keep him company. He spun the wheel and watched the numbers skip past like mile markers. A hiss, a whisper, a preacher, a late-night host telling jokes to a world that needed them. Then, as if the bridge had leaned down to put a mouth to his ear, a clear voice cut through the straw of sound. "This is the Basin Bridge Advisory Service," the voice said in that calm, authoritative tone travel radios always used. "Eastbound, maintain 55. Do not pass. Keep right except to avoid an obstruction." Silas glanced at the signs as if to see them nod along. Nothing flashed. The advisory transmitters, if they were even active, sounded like a thing from the old days. He was old enough to remember them in full voice, when the station's call letters mattered. He let the dial rest on 1610 and felt the little tick of the tuning lock in. 2 miles ahead, the voice went on. Right lane partially obstructed by a disabled vehicle. Begin moving left when safe. Maintain speed. Do not stop on the bridge. He leaned forward the way a person does when listening to a story that might affect their next 5 minutes. The message could have been a loop. It could have been old. But old messages didn't call out specifics like that. The bridge is long. 2 miles is a kind of intimacy. Fog rolled in soft and turned the lights of his dash into a more private room. He watched the reflectors on the rail archive, his presence with a click of light for each one. He signaled left early because the lanes were quiet, and because the voice had asked in a tone that earned cooperation. He held to 55, no more, a finger's width on the throttle. The pickup appeared where the voice had put it, dark and still, angled slightly into the lane with one tire flat as a hand pressed to a tabletop. No figure walked near it, no flares, no tow. Silas slid past with the smooth indifference of a big thing staying stable in close quarters. He checked his mirror, and the pair of headlights behind him stayed in their lane and followed his lead. Nothing dramatic happened, which was exactly what a person likes to report about a night. "Good," the voice said, as if he'd checked a box. Expect intermittent fog for the next 5 miles. Follow the centerline reflectors with the blue pin. If the blue disappears, reduce to 40 until it returns. Eastbound, mind the crosswind near the mile 93 marker. It has a habit of setting your trailer a half foot to the side. Hands steady, feet light. It didn't feel odd to be coached. It felt like a seasoned driver in the right seat, making gentle suggestions while you handled your own rig in your own way. He looked for the blue pin. There it was. Every 6th reflector a dot that read different from the rest. He hadn't noticed them before. Maybe he'd never looked. The human eye can be taught what to see in a night as generous as this one. The voice kept its pace. If you need refuge, the next bay is after 94, left side, not a full shoulder. Enough to restrap. Do not stop, unless required for safety. If you can, wait for the next bay after 96. It's wider. Silas had never seen bays here. The bridge was a scold on the subject of stopping. Then the fog thinned, and he saw a swelling on the left where concrete made a square throat off the lane. A maintenance pocket, maybe. Nothing like an exit and not a place to linger, but wider than the rest of the world. He didn't need it. He drove on. The blue pins kept him 1 notch less alone. "Heron, call in the next quarter mile," said the voice. It sounded almost like a joke. But then a heron made that so human creak from the water below, and the night went a degree stranger. In a way he didn't mind. "That's the wind gap. Guard your line." He did. The breeze pressed his trailer with the firm politeness of a stranger stepping aside at a narrow door. He held the wheel as he'd been taught, no white knuckles, no lazy drift. He felt the truck's weight keep the promise of its layout. The advisory used those long, square AM vowels that older equipment likes. Now and then it repeated itself, like a friend, making sure you'd heard. It gave distances that matched his odometer too neatly to be a coincidence, unless the coincidence was the kind that makes a person feel looked after. He asked nobody in particular, "Who's talking?" It didn't answer. He had a memory of his father taking him to a guardrail when he was a boy, and naming birds as if they were members of a neighborhood he spent time in. "Night heron," he'd said then. "Sounds like your mama's old kitchen door." Silas smiled at the thought and nodded to the dark. Ahead, a low light glowed amber in the fog, a puddle of safer air where someone had placed a work lantern on a sawhorse. It should have startled. It didn't. In the puddle, a small sign stood crooked. It bore a simple icon he recognized now from strange corners of other nights. A line drawing of a lantern. Under it, block letters someone had made with a stencil. "Hold your thread." The voice, as if it shared his view, said, "That's the thread. Stay on it." Lane change discouraged. It gave him no sermon about why. He joined the practice, which was patience. Traffic in the oncoming lanes made a far river of red beads. Once, a wide load crossed him, accompanied by police and a pickup with a pole measuring clearance, the whole train moving like polite dancers at a slow song. The advisory didn't comment. It didn't need to. When he wanted to talk, it talked. When it didn't, the swamp filled the silence with the music it made whether he was here or not. The bridge went on. The bridge always goes on. Out of nowhere, the voice said, "Refuge Bay 17 ahead. If you feel the need, take it. If not, maintain 55. Do not stop on the bridge without cause." He did not feel the need. He felt the curiosity. He saw the bay, a wider pocket with a metal rail inside it, the kind a maintenance crew rests a truck against between tasks. On the rail, someone had stuck a small weathered decal. He couldn't make it out in fog. It wasn't for him. He stayed in the lane and let the night continue to decide what it wanted from him. "Approaching Whiskey Bay," the voice said. "Do not be lulled. Crosswind persists. Some eastbound drivers misjudge the slight downgrade. Engage full attention." His hand flicked lightly against the wheel. He didn't need the reminder, and yet it was good to be told the right things aloud. He drifted a thought toward the idea that maybe the transmitter had been updated, that this was a new system with pucks in the pavement and an algorithm with good manners. He liked that explanation almost as much as the other one, the one that said certain places hold on to helpful voices because that's what they're for. A sign flashed ahead, "Incident ahead, stay in lane." The advisory voice matched it by a heartbeat. "State police moving with a disabled semi." Eastbound, do not stop. In this next quarter mile, hazard lights once for visibility, then off. Do not exceed 50. Do not pass. He tapped his hazards once, a wink without drama. The glow lifted the fog dirt in front of him and made the bridge look like it had been dusted with old flour. Around the bend, a cruiser idled in the left lane with its bar lit low and steady. In front of it, a tractor sat in the right lane on 3 wheels that touched pavement. The fourth was a memory trying to become a plan. A trooper waved a line through with his palm. Silas held his speed steady and made a line that others could use. He gave the trooper a nod the way people nod across big work. The trooper, eyes tired and kind, nodded back with an economy that said, "Thanks for doing your part." "Good," the advisory said. The way someone says good to a child who's tied their shoe exactly how shoes want to be tied. Eastbound, next advisory. Do not mistake the blue of the reflectors for the water. It's quiet tonight. Quiet means fog. Quiet does not mean empty. He drove. The voice offered small suggestions, then went quiet for long stretches, because a person can only be told so many things before the telling turns into noise. He appreciated its restraint. Once, as the fog thinned, he glanced over the rail into the black water and caught the impression of a reflection that didn't behave like other reflections, a round amber halo bobbing in place, as if something below had lifted a light to say, "You're close to the edge." He drew inward by inches. The halo pushed back into the dark and became what water becomes when it isn't being asked to be a mirror. At the end of the bridge, the swamp peeled away into dry land, with the swiftness of a curtain pulled back. The advisory softened. "You are leaving the causeway. Resume general safe practices. The next rest area on your route is the Atchafalaya Welcome Center. Warm light, clean floors, good place to breathe." The voice paused, then added, almost in a tone that wanted to be a smile, "If you see a lantern pinned to the bulletin board, leave a story or a thanks." The signal crackled. A call sign unfurled like the tail of a kite. "You've been listening to Basin Bridge Advisory, 1610 AM. Thank you for your safe attention." The carrier stayed for a second longer, then thinned. The dial became the same old coast-to-coast stew of radio ghosts. Silas rolled off at Butte La Rose out of respect more than necessity. The Welcome Center had that warm light advisory voices brag about. The floor smelled like lemon. A display about the basin's history wore its curiosity with pride. How the river made choices and people adapted. How the bridge had changed commerce. How storms and floods had taught the region to set itself low and strong. A case near the window held items from roadwork along the causeway. A hard hat faded to the color of straw, a bent piece of rail, a small brass lantern with soot on the inside of its glass, and a folded card propped beside it. The card read, 1993 Night Crossing Cruise. Pace saves lives. On the community board, among the flyers for seasonal fairs and a flyer advertising bait, someone had pinned a small rectangle of cardstock. A hand had drawn a lantern on it in clean lines. Beneath, in fine print, 3 words, "Hold your thread." The same words painted on the sawhorse in the fog. He reached into his pocket and found a receipt that didn't need to travel with him anymore. He wrote, in neat, all capitals letters that would read even if the ink faded, "Thank you for the voice." He pinned it under the lantern card and pressed the tack down with the knuckle of his thumb until Wood acknowledged him. On his way out, he asked the clerk, a woman with the sturdy posture of a person who spends 8 hours between a cash drawer and a door, "That advisory on 1610 still active at night?" "Daytimes, sure," she said. "Nights. It's supposed to be automated, but half the time it naps. We get complaints. Sometimes, the bridge needs talking to us. Used to be my daddy did the talking. He had the voice for it, made everything sound like instructions from a favorite teacher. He passed 5 years ago." She smiled into a space that held both sadness and respect. "Sometimes late, I turn the dial on my brakes and swear I hear him reminding folks not to pass. Maybe I just miss him." Silas nodded. "Tonight, it had exactly what I needed, when I needed it." "Then maybe it's working as advertised," she said. Or maybe the swamp likes to keep old routines handy. Either way, I'll take it. He took a bottle of water and a pack of crackers for the glove box and stepped back into the night. The air felt less tight here. The road off the bridge gave him the option to hurry. He didn't take it. He set his pace the way a body sets a rhythm when it's found what works. The next week, on the return, fog did a different dance. The beacons hadn't remembered to flash. He tuned to 1,610, without hurry. Static, weather, and then the same patient tone. Eastbound, maintain 55. Do not pass. Blue reflectors mark the thread. He followed them like a person following chalk marks left by someone kind. At a slight sway in the wind, the voice said, "Let the sway pass through you. Don't keep it." He let it pass. And it didn't turn into anything else. No one else seemed to notice the advisory was doing more than reciting a script. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was precisely a script written by someone who had worked this bridge long enough to put the right words in the right order. He didn't sit in the cab arguing. He drove. He reached the far side intact and unbothered, which is the favorite feeling of everyone who makes this their work. A month later, well past midnight, he found himself amid a stream of rigs, making the crossing like a string of quiet beads. In his mirror, a set of headlights hung respectful. He kept to his lane and his number. The advisory suggested, gently, "Hazards on once at the 93. Let your neighbors know where you are." He did. A half second later, the mirror lights blinked too, a little conversation in the fog. The bridge seemed to approve it stayed calm. When he speaks of the basin now, he speaks of the hum of tires and the way the bridge lays a hand on your shoulder and asks for your best manners. He sometimes lets slip a detail about a radio voice with old vowels that knew his mile markers as if it had installed them itself. If someone tells him they've never heard it, he shrugs and says maybe it doesn't need to talk when they cross. The bridge is a long teacher. It picks its moments. On a rare afternoon run, sun bright and glare hard on the concrete, he looked up at the metal cabinets along the rail that housed the advisory's small heart. One was open. A man in a vest stood with his hands inside it, as if he were a watchmaker. Silas rolled past and lifted a hand. The man didn't see him, but a sticker on the inside door shone briefly. Hand-drawn, simple, a lantern, not official, not required. Exactly right. He keeps his dial ready for 1610. He keeps a spare card in the clipboard with a lantern he drew himself, in case he finds a board that wants it. He keeps his pace honest when the bridge deserves it, which is always. He will tell you, if you catch him at a quiet counter with a cup cooling, that some places on the road hold voices the way certain rooms keep heat even after the heater is off. He'll tell you the sound of a heron can be an instruction if you let it. He'll tell you the best trick for crossing the causeway is to hold your thread and to let the night take its slow breath around you without trying to speed it up. It isn't a trick at all. It's a way of being, and the lane is the perfect size for it. Story number 7. The night across the flat middle of Illinois was a sheet of charcoal with red pinpricks from far-off towers. Wind farms blinked their sleepy rhythm red. Black. Red like steady breathing. Marisol kept the wheel easy and her foot lighter yet. She hauled a full load of flour, 22 pallets of paper white weight that asked for soft turns and no hard braking. The trailer rode like a well-behaved animal, quiet and dense. She'd stopped early for coffee and to tighten a strap on a bulkhead bar more out of ritual than need. Now the miles unrolled like a ribbon cut straight as a ruler line through fields sleeping under old frost. On the interstate, signs warned of night work and late closures, the sort of polite interruptions that make a route into a story. Then the big digital board ahead of her lit with a request that wasn't a request at all. Crash ahead. All traffic. Exit 212. Marisol breathed out through her nose in a calm little sound that held no complaint. She clicked her signal and let the exit ramp gather her. The ramp curved around a dark patch of woods, and the interstate singing tires thinned behind her like a choir closing a hymn. The detour signs were the temporary kind, portable and competent. Orange a row with County E under it. She followed it because that's what a driver does. The night lost its median and became a two-laner with a thin shoulder and ditches holding water like shallow mirrors. The truck's own light pushed the world forward a few yards at a time, and she let her pace adjust to the road's ideas. A white farmhouse appeared and slid away. A grain elevator stood like a saint, tall and patient, with a single window lit high where night workers kept the place human. The CB had been quiet for a long while. She turned it down to a whisper that was more the idea of company than the sound of it. Her route app blinked and recalculated, and offered the same thin line she was already on. County E fell through a hamlet with a water tower that said Caldwell Ferry in blue block letters. A small historic marker faced the road, lit by a lamp that had more gentleness than wattage. She caught just a few words in her headlight sweep. Lock, canal. Lift old words for a kind of river road this part of the country used to know by heart. Beyond town, the land rolled a little, not the showy kind of hills, just enough to make headlights work their way up and down like nods. A sound reached her that didn't belong to engine or tires or wind. It was small and clean. A bell struck soft with a padded mallet. 3 tones. Measured. Then silence. She glanced at the dash as if a warning light might have decided to learn music. The gauges sat in their middles with the composure of good students. She lifted the radio and flipped through channels out of reflex. Static. A distant voice too far off to shape into a word. She put the mic down. The bell came again as she crossed a small low place where the road dipped, the sound like a signal any careful person would invent. She slowed a measure. The sign on the right said road may flood in that honest black on yellow tone that didn't make a fuss. The ditches on both sides carried a thin sheet of water that refused to be in a hurry. It looked like glass laid down and forgotten. The bell 3 notes tapped the air just as her tires reached the start of the dip. She eased off a little more. The water on the left had crept into the lane in a meniscus 1/4 inch deep, a film that could turn a heavy thing too light with no warning. She stayed to the Pearlby crown, felt the steer tires step through a slick patch with the care of a hand finding a railing in the dark, and rolled out of it without drama. She shouldn't have heard a bell out here. There were no crossings. No churches nearby kept midnight chimes for no one. County E wandered between fields and small woods, and the bones of a canal that had only partly given itself back to earth. A thin line of cottonwoods drew a dark scribble where water lay beyond the reach of most headlights. She passed another road may flood sign, this one attached to a metal post that had learned how to lean. The bell came again, the same 3 notes, off to the right where cattails stuck like paintbrushes in the ditch. It wasn't loud. It was clear. She felt it in her shoulders, the way you feel a signal before you name it. She slowed to 45. The night didn't mind. A mile later, the road opened into a stretch over black water. The map had named it Old Navigation Cut, but the name had meant nothing to her when she saw it on the screen. In her lamps, the low crossing looked like any other span built to step a 2-laner calmly over something that wasn't a road. The rail was modest, the signs polite, but something about the surface ahead was wrong. The black looked deeper. The road edge disappeared in a way that didn't match poured concrete. A thin current rode over the lane at an angle, moving with the grace of a creature that didn't know it was being watched. The bell pealed 3 notes from somewhere under the bridge rail. She brought the truck to a calm stop 50 feet before the water's reach. Hazards on with a single, unhurried click. The flower in the box behind her did not lean or fuss. The engine idled its low iron heartbeat. She watched the water consider the road in front of her. Out here, stopping felt like a rule broken. No stopping on bridge signs belonged to other places, but a person who has made a job of watching the line and the weather knows when the line has been handed a task it can't manage alone. She lifted the mic. Southbound tractor, County E, approaching the Old Navigation Cut, she said in a voice that kept its own pace. Got water over the road, winds east, maybe a light current crossing the lane. Static found a shape. A man's voice settled into channel like a weight set on a table. Copy, flower hauler. I'm in your mirrors, a ways back, heavy on steel. Bell rang for you too? It was half a joke and half not. Marisol looked at the rail. The sound had come from near one of the small concrete stanchions. A bracket hung there, rusted and sensible, empty. 3 notes, she said. Thought I dreamed it until I didn't. Caldwell Ferry used to lift when the canal ran, the man said. My granddad worked a season here when he was young. 3 bells meant the span was moving. You checked your pace and you waited for the light. Light? Lantern, before the bulbs, he said. Then a bulb when the county got fancy. Red for hold, green for go. This stretch floods when the river thinks big. I'm 2 minutes behind you. We'll look at it together. The bell sounded again, soft, spaced like the memory of a system still doing its job after the tools were gone. The water at the far side blinked with reflections the way eyes do when someone tilts a lamp in a window. Marisol clicked her hazmat lights once more as courtesy, even though there was nothing hazardous in her freight. Another set of headlights swelled slowly behind her and flattened as the other driver eased to a respectful stop, nose a truck length back, and offset a bit so they could both see the same picture without their lights fighting. The man came over the radio, voice warm. Name's Dwight. You seeing what I'm seeing? Water creeping right to left, she said. Hard to measure depth at Crown. Surface looks fast enough to pretend it's slow. That's how it gets you, he said. If you want, I'll walk it where it's shallow with a mower handle. I keep one on the catwalk for stubborn tarps. It's 3/4 yard long. If it disappears, we wait. County signs say road may flood, Marisol said, not sit and wish. She checked mirrors, checked the quiet field edges. No oncoming lights. Let me try a different thing. Back 30 yards there's a farm lane. I'll nose in and back it out to face west. Hold the lane with the tractor. You do the same. If someone slips through not paying attention, they'll see us and stop playing hero. Copy, he said. Bell's got me listening anyhow. They did the move like a practice team, though they'd never spoken before tonight. 2 rigs turned themselves into careful barricades, without blocking the world to a person who needed room. The bell sounded as Marisol straightened her wheels. The tone shaped the night into a space where patience fit. A minute later, 2 pickups rolled up from the west, locals by their lack of formality. They stopped in the road, windows sliding down with that smooth motor whisper. A woman in a hunting cap leaned out. It's over the top at the far end, she said. Covers the stripes. Easy to get off. You can hit the river road south and come back over at the highway bridge. Adds 15. Saves you trouble. Been like this since the rain last week. Bells still ringing? The man beside her asked, curious and almost fond. Rang us in, Dwight said into the dark and into the radio at once. He tapped his window to greet them. The woman lifted her hand back. They leave that bracket there just for looks? Back when I was a kid, the man said, the old bridge tender would sit inside the shack and ring the bell when the span was going up. He liked the ceremony. Used to say sound got farther and behaved better than a light in snow and fog. County cut the draw out in the 80s, filled the gap with slab. Bell sat battery fed a while. Then they took that too. Keep hearing it when the water gets ideas though. He shrugged in a way that said he didn't mind if you believed him or not. Round the south road. You'll be fine. Marisol and Dwight thanked them. The pickups eased past, their tires writing temporary signatures in the wet. The bell chimed 3 notes. Slow as a heartbeat, and then kept its counsel. Marisol pulled her rig into motion toward the south road, past a sign that leaned as if listening. Detour when flooded, use County 9. The app approved, less because it knew this night than because it liked a route with fewer unknowns. The detour carried them along a line of trees where the old canal kept its bed like a quilt folded under a bed frame. A slab-sided museum building slid by, small, respectable, with a light on in the entry. Its sign, read in a glance, said, Canal and Ferry Heritage, Thursdays 10-2. Dwight's voice returned on the CB after a quiet minute. Funny thing, he said. When my granddad told it, he said 3 bells meant hold, 1 means clear. I never heard the one out here. Just the 3. Maybe it's enough, Marisol said. Maybe the warning is the part that matters. They crossed the highway bridge, a clean, modern sweep with rails that meant business, and turned north again. The river rolled under them with the slow strength of a creature that didn't fear errors because it had time to correct them. Streetlights along the far bank did that small-town halo thing around their posts, making cones of gold that moths would find in warmer months. The detour dropped them back onto County E just beyond the flooded stretch. The night resumed being farm and fence, and the small sculptures of stacked hay. The bell did not follow. It stayed where its job was. The road showed its simple face again. Marisol ran steady. The digital board at the interstate reentry told the same story about a crash to the west. To the east, the sky owned its black. She'd lost 15 minutes and gained the exact right kind of respect for a part of the map she hadn't been introduced to until tonight. Dwight came up even with her on the on-ramp shoulder and gave her a soft flash of marker lights, 2 taps, gratitude in the language of lamps. She answered with 2 of her own. He took the first lane. She took the second. They fell into the glide of interstate again and became 2 flecks in a stream that never sleeps. She made her receiver by dawn, a facility that smelled like soap and yeast and somebody's lunch from a distant room. The dock crew moved like it was choreography they were proud of. After paperwork, a clerk with a knit cap and a friendly habit pointed to a bulletin board populated with polite chaos. "If you've got a minute," he said, "local society's passing around a flyer. Old Canal Museum needs somebody to talk to the county about keeping the entry light on overnight. People getting turned around out there with the detours." On the board, the flyer showed a sepia photograph of the old bridge. It really had been a lift. 2 steel towers, cable, a house the size of a good shed. A man with a cap stood beside the shack holding a bell rope like he was listening to it. The caption read, "Caldwell Ferry Lift, 1931. In the bottom corner, a tidy hand had drawn a small lantern. Beneath, in pencil, someone had written, 3 means wait, 1 means go. If you know, you know." Weeks later, with a delivery that put her through the same county during daylight, Marisol parked her tractor at the museum's small lot for a proper look. The building was respectable in the way 2-room libraries are. Inside, glass cases held iron pieces with tags calling them by names that felt good in the mouth. Wicket, Paul, Stanchion. On a table, a brass ship's bell sat with a rope tassel attached. A card explained, "Bell used to signal bridge movement and high water warnings. Retired 1987. In the same case, a small metal lantern waited, its glass fogged with age. A label below it, "Tender's Light, used in fog. Pace saves lives." An older woman with a volunteer badge stood with a cup of tea, the steam making a small ghost in the museum's cool air. "You're out of your way for this," she said, friendly but not nosy. "Wasn't far," Marisol answered. "Heard a bell on the road at night. Figured I'd come thank whoever keeps old work talking." The woman smiled without surprise. "It does that now and then. All we do is keep the stories dusted so folks know what they're hearing." Some nights the canal remembers out loud. Marisol put a few bills in the donation jar without turning it into a production, and wrote a little note on the guest pad that read simply, "3 bells. Thanks for the hold." Next to the jar, cards the size of a business note sat for the taking. A line-drawn lantern in the corner, and beneath it, small type. "If you hear the bell, treat it like a friend telling you to wait." The road appreciates manners. She took 1 card and tucked it into the sleeve inside her logbook. Back on the road, the map wore its noon colors, and nothing pressed. She drove past the spot where the water had written its slow signature over the pavement. In full sun, it looked unremarkable, a modest dip that rain would forget. A stain traced the edge where the water had climbed, and then retreated. A bracket at the rail held nothing but rust. She didn't test it. She kept her pace and counted 3 signs in a row, one of the odd human habits that makes a person feel like they're living in rhythm with something. That night, 1,000 miles off, she slept in her bunk with the lid cracked on the window to let a little weather in. Somewhere, 3 tones shaped a clean, small thought. They could have come from a crossing arm, from a phone left to ring a house that had nobody in it anymore, from a memory that liked to practice. She didn't assign it a job. She let it be what it was, a reminder that sometimes the road holds onto old signals, so new travelers don't have to make every decision alone. When drivers swap strange night stories under canopy lights or in booths where coffee never quite cooled, she told this one sometimes. No drama, no sharp edges. County road, old canal. 3 soft notes from nowhere precise enough to nudge a person into the right choice. She didn't argue about cause. She didn't make a sermon out of consequence. She said what mattered. The bell did its part, so she did hers. The flower rode calm as bred asleep. The bridge did what bridges do, and didn't ask to be the star. Somewhere in a small museum, a bell that used to live outdoors, sat indoors now, waiting. And out on the blacktop in certain weather, with water thinking it could pretend to be road, You could still hear 3 tones that helped a driver be the kind of careful that brings a load to where the light is warm. Story number 8. The prairie at night has a hush that feels like a held breath. Between Tucumcari and Vaughan, the land keeps a low profile under a lid of stars, and the highway runs straight as if the country had been combed. Nadia liked these runs. She hauled medical cold freight boxes nested in foam, monitored by a little screen that kept a steady green. The reefer talked softly behind her, a careful cadence, and the cab glowed the warm amber of a room where someone left a lamplight on for company. The message board before the split woke from its dark and wrote 3 sentences in orange. Crash ahead. US 54. Closed at MP. 204. Follow detour. She felt the small shift in attention that such boards ask for. Then a mile later, the first detour arrow appeared, temporary sign, reflective, and below it in smaller letters, County 27. The arrow pointed to a 2-lane that wore a clean shoulder and a fresh stripe like a pressed shirt. Nadia's route app sulked and recalculated. The new line ran through ranch country and rejoined the highway 20 miles on. She didn't argue. She set her blinker, let the lanes gather her into the right turn, and found the 2 lanes rhythm. The world narrowed and softened. Fence posts walked the horizon like punctuation marks. Cattle, black on black, moved only when they chose to move. Wind turbines far off blinked red in a sequence that felt like a heartbeat. The CB had nothing to offer but a faraway hello and grainy weather from a county she wasn't in. She turned it down. She preferred the sound of tires on this kind of road, the long, even hush with a faint tremolo where the aggregate changed. A sign with friendly honesty announced Open Range. Another warned of deer with the silhouette of one mid-leap, as if caught thinking about it. County 27 wound past a cluster of lights that was a small store and a gas pump under a canopy with one bulb out. A wooden sign out front, said Estrella in letters painted by a careful hand. She made a note of the name only because a named place is less likely to evaporate in memory than a nameless one. Beyond Estrella, the 2-lane kept its manners. The stars were fierce enough to grade the air into layers. Her route app blinked, thought, and then gave up. Service dropped to a blank. That happens out here. It wasn't unkind. It was just a pause. The next detour sign pointed on, arrow tilted slightly down, as if the person who had tightened its bolts had been a degree shorter. Under the arrow, a small decal rested faded, but there, a line drawing of a lantern. The simple, almost childlike kind of sketch a hand makes without ruler or fuss. Nadia had seen that mark in odd places before, never in a way that made a superstition out of it. She nodded once, as if to an old acquaintance across a quiet room. A mile further, the road crossed a dry arroyo. The bridge was modest, a slab over a cut. In her lamps, the sides of the cut looked like a cake sliced cleanly to show layers. The wind brought the smell of sage. She kept her speed honest. The fence along her right had small squares of old tin wired to posts every 100 yards, and sometimes the tin caught the light and flashed like a blink. Then the detour sign went missing. She came to an intersection where the county map had decided to offer options instead of certainties. Straight was County 27. Right was County 27 Amperes. Left was a road with no number at all, just a name carved into a wooden plank that read, Rogers Draw. The arrow she expected, her quiet shepherd in reflective orange, was simply not there. The only guidepost in her lamps was a rectangle of tin on the fence nearest the left turn, wired in place and cut into a shape that was less rectangle than she'd first thought. A little tab at the bottom suggested a handle. A lantern. Somebody had taken a pair of snips to trash metal and made a useful picture. Nadia held where she was, hazard lights off because there was no one to warn but herself. She looked at the road surfaces the way a person looks at faces. Straight had the smoother center line. Right had the sharper gravel at the margins. Left had a drift on the far side where wind had gathered caliche like fine snow. A coyote moved along the fence and didn't trouble to look her way. She breathed, checked her reefer's glow still green, and reached for the mic. Southbound on a detour off 54, she said to the quiet air. Anybody running County 27 tonight? Static. Then a voice, old radio softened, replied as if it had been resting and not sleeping. 27 splits funny after Estrella. Straight'll take you deep and dry. You'll feed it 60 minutes and get 20 back. 27A's got a washout waiting in a saddle. You don't want that with a box. Roger's draw will take you back to pavement if you mind the cattle guard and the false flat. Keep to the crown. Nadia tilted her head at the dash, the way a person does when a sentence finds them where they didn't expect it. Appreciate it, she said, simple. Where's the false flat? It'll look like work to your engine and not to your eye. Don't trust your eye. Trust the sound. And when the old mailboxes start, slow to 30. Dog leg with no shoulder. Don't put your trailer tire in the cheat. He sounded like someone who had folded the paper map of this place 1,000 times and had creased it well. You local? She asked. Was, he said, and the channel gave her no more detail. Lantern on the fence post was your sign. Folks with time nail those up when a detour has to walk a while. You'll see another at the turn, where the road lies to you. How far to the highway from here? 8 miles like the crow. 10 like a rig proud to live. A pause opened that felt like routine, not reluctance. She gave her thanks again, named her rig and direction out of habit, and let the mic hang back in its cradle. He didn't sign off with a handle. Some people didn't. She turned left onto Roger's draw. The surface changed under her tires, a change you hear if you pay attention. The stripe vanished. The world became 2 beams and their margins. She set her speed to 40, then 35, felt the truck settle into a smaller version of itself meant for smaller rooms. The arroyo she had crossed earlier had neighbors. The land here is all interruptions and then long sentences. The first cattle guard sang under her axles, metal on metal in a quick, chopped chord. She took it square, no drama, and counted 3 fence posts with tin clipped into lanterns after it. Each one flashed a brief, cheerful yes as she passed. The road tipped into the kind of slope that tricks the body. The engine tone deepened. The false flat. She kept her foot steady and didn't let impatience borrow fuel from caution. A sign appeared, homey made, reflective tape on plywood dogleg A-head, in letters that would have looked clumsy in daylight and perfect in the dark. She slowed to 30. Old mailboxes showed up in her lamps. Dented survivors hunched on a row like elders on a bench, their flags down. The dogleg arrived without apology. It was tight, with a cheat in the shoulder where rain had worked longer than the road crew. She held the line through it like she was carrying a sleeping child. Firm, kind, no sudden moves. Her trailer followed with the dignity of heavy things done right. The road spit her onto a straighter stretch. A jackrabbit ran alongside for a dozen strides and made a choice favoring grass over asphalt. The sky seemed even bigger here. Without the center line, the world felt 1 degree closer, like a whisper. Up ahead, a post held another tin lantern. It sat at a Y where the right fork looked smooth and friendly. The left looked a shade rougher, and everything in her wanted to take the smooth. She remembered the voice. You'll see another at the turn where the road lies to you. She took the left. The right fork led to a gate in the near distance, its chains shine catching her lamp as if to admit what it was, a road that ended in a locked invitation. She nodded to the air and kept on. A creek that wasn't on her map crossed the draw. It didn't run so much as curl its shoulder over the concrete. She watched the ripples and checked for depth in the way you learn. Look for what the water is doing, not what you want it to do. Her tires moved through with a soft sound like someone smoothing a sheet over a bed. On the far side, the road lifted out of the draw and found a rhythm that was almost a song. Halfway up a gentle rise, the CB woke. You with the cold freight, the voice said, that same old unhurried tone. You'll see a windmill stump. When you do, ease a hair left even though the road doesn't ask. There's a hole on the right that someone blue flagged, but the tape blew away. Save your tire the trouble. Copy, she said. Thanks for the heads up. You'll hit Highway 41 in 4. Left is Vaughn, right is Long. Lantern on the stop sign's mine. Stuck it there last summer when the East Road washed. If someone hasn't peeled it. The voice paused, not dramatically. Safe run. Same to you, Nadia said. You out here tonight or just keeping an ear on your county? County keeps itself, he said. I listen when I can. The channel went soft, then quiet in the way. A quiet channel does, like an empty porch that belongs to someone you like. She found the windmill stump exactly where he said it would be, a wooden tower, the color of old paper holding nothing up anymore. The hole near it was the kind that makes a person swear in daylight and sigh at night. She slid a foot left. The road forgave her. Two small houses appeared far off to the left, their porch lights a warmer color than the stars. A dog barked once, announced it was on duty, and retired to a warm spot. The land unrolled like cloth. Then a sign emerged out of the night. Stop. Someone had tied a small hando lamp to the back of it with baling wire, the kind of little LED a person keeps in a kitchen drawer. It wasn't on, but the shape of it was unmistakable. Beside it, a decal no bigger than a postage stamp clung to the metal. A lantern. Someone had taken the time. The crossroad was State 41, with its proper stripes and shoulders that looked like they'd shaken hands with an engineer. Nadia laughed once, the kind of laugh that is more breath than sound. She turned left. Her reefer glowed green. The stars arranged themselves like polite spectators. She let 70 come back slowly, like a memory. In Vaughan, the truck stop on the south end had a wide lot and a hum that made human life sound like a familiar machine. She pulled in not because the truck needed fuel, but because she did. Inside, the clerk had a radio by the cigarette case, turned to a quiet station that played a steel guitar like a nostalgia turned earnest. On a corkboard near the restrooms, the usual chaos arranged itself into an accidental order plumbing services, a farm auction, a flyer for a community breakfast in a church with a roof shaped like an idea. Tucked into a corner, half hidden by a notice about lost keys, a small card waited. Someone had stamped a lantern on it. Below, in neat handwriting, if you hit Roger's draw after midnight, mind the dog leg and the false flat. If you hear the old CB voice, thank him when you can. The clerk saw her reading and said, "Did they make you take the long way?" He had a kind face. Most night clerks do. The job asks for it. Detour off 54, through Estrella, down Rogers, she said. Somebody on the radio walked me past a hole like we were neighbors. That'll be Earl they're always talking about, he said. Not in a spooky way, just in a way that had a story shaped like a man's name. Used to run cattle out that way, kept a handheld and a map in the glove box. He'd sit on his porch some nights and wait for the detours to send folks his way so he could give them the 2 sentences that matter. Past a few years back, folks still say thank you in case he's got the squelch open wherever he ended up. Nice work if you can get it, Nadia said. And the clerk smiled like they'd agreed on something without quite naming it. She wrote a quick note on a sticky the clerk handed her. Slow for the dog leg, trussed the lantern and stuck it under the little card with a pushpin. She bought a cinnamon roll because cinnamon at 2 in the morning is as close to a blessing as truck stop food gets, and took a bottle of water for the road back north. In the lot, a driver in a ball cap tapped his taillights twice to a friend pulling in. The friend answered with 2 taps. Lights are language. You say hello with them like you say it with words. Morning, when it came, folded the extremes of the night back into the familiar. The detour on the main highway was still in force. Nadia rolled past its beginning and saw troopers parked with cones and a tow, working an honest puzzle where lanes had tangled themselves into a situation. She didn't slow to gawk. She gave them the space the job requires. On the northbound run 2 nights later, she found the same board with the same orange script. The detour signs were still out, more of them now. At the split where the sign had been missing, someone had planted a new arrow in shiny metal like a teacher restocking pencils. The tin lantern on the fence remained, clinking a little when the breeze got ideas. The dogleg wore 2 fresh flares set on their sides with their lights turned off, like tools resting after good work. The windmill stump stood its post. At the stop sign where the hando lamp had been wired, the lamp was gone. The decal had curled a little at its corner but stuck for now. She took the draw with the same pace and the same care, not because someone was listening but because she was. The CB murmured ordinary things. A driver asked if a cafe in Clovis did pancakes at night. Someone said yes with such certainty it felt like a promise. Far away, a voice that sounded like an unhurried neighbor spoke 3 words into a quiet channel, mind the crown, and then the air settled back. Weeks after, in a different state, in a different night, the small motif returned in an unexpected place. A way station office bulletin board with a cartoon flyer advertising a county fair. In the corner of the page, a tiny lantern had been stamped in blue. Under it, a sentence, "If you know, you know." Nadia smiled, pressed a thumb against the corner, as if smoothing a wrinkle out of a shirt, and headed back to her lane. She tells this one sometimes if the conversation lands in that place drivers love, where the miles are on the table, and the night is telling everyone how to breathe. She keeps it neat. Detour. Lost. Sign. Tin lanterns. A voice with the patience of fence posts. The false flat. The dogleg. The way a left fork that looks a little worse is sometimes the right road. She doesn't make a sermon of it. If someone wants a moral, she offers the one the land gave her. The best turn is the one your tires and your ears agree on. And if a small light shows you something kind, you can choose to believe it without writing a letter to a ghost. At the edge of the map, where county roads hold their own council, the night sometimes keeps old habits alive. People leave little marks, tin lanterns, taped lamp, a scribble on a stop sign that help a stranger be less of one. If a voice steps in to add a sentence, all the better. Nadia sleeps well after such nights. The reefer, a steady green heartbeat on the other side of the wall. The miles unwinding in her head like ribbon tucked back into a box exactly the way it came. Somewhere out under a sky with too many stars to count, a piece of tin clinks against a fence post, and an arrow points toward a road less smooth and more true. Story number 2. They say the storm began before the first drop touched the glass. It stirred as a feeling in the cab, a pressure in the ears, a taste of iron on the tongue, just as Grant rolled into the rest area where the map on the sign had been faded by so many seasons that counties looked like islands. He took a slot between two sleeping rigs and killed the engine. Wind tested the seals around the windows. The sky had that strange bronze color storms wear when they arrive without lightning to announce them. He sat with the radio off and his logbook open, his pen making careful, blocky letters that he pretended to admire. Somewhere behind him, a soda can shifted in the cup holder, as if nudged by a fingertip. He glanced at the passenger seat out of habit, found it as tidy as he'd left it, and smiled at the habit itself. A long-haul driver learns to check even when there's nothing to find. The rest area building was a low slab of pale brick with a row of machines where snacks slept behind glass. Grant liked to stretch his legs before the rain hit. He stepped out, felt the first cool breeze lift the hair on his arms, and walked toward the glow and humming of the vending machines. The air smelled like asphalt just before it changes color, like dust about to turn to clay. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed a note that made the eyes sting. A tourist brochure rack sagged with pamphlets about a cavern and a museum no one seemed to visit anymore. The radio in the corner, one of those old public service sets with a dial and a push-to-talk mic, sat in its cradle, a relic next to a payphone with a missing cord. He almost laughed at the thought of anyone needing a CB in a rest area like this. Lightning finally cracked somewhere far off, more light than sound, a muttered announcement that the storm had taken its seat. Grant punched a few buttons for chips and a bottle of water. The machine hesitated, then gave him an extra package he hadn't paid for. He put it back on the little metal shelf beside the machine, a habit from his father, who once told him that taking more than you pay for leads to bad nights on the road. As he turned to go, he noticed the atlas on the free Take One table. It was a thin fold-out, the kind printed cheaply. He flipped it open and saw a red dot drawn in marker on a highway loop he recognized. But it wasn't where the rest area was. The dot sat on a river crossing a dozen miles ahead, a bridge with a rusted arch he'd crossed before sunrise 100 times. The radio in the corner clicked. It wasn't plugged into the wall. He tilted his head, listening to the first shy sigh of static, followed by a sound like a sigh forming into a single note. His hand drifted up to his chest, palm flat over the idle thump of his heart. The radio's note dipped and rose as if searching for his pulse and trying to match it. Then a voice, thin and friendly, like a song you hear outside a window while drifting to sleep, started humming. No words, not at first. Just a string of notes anyone might hum trying to recall the middle of something. He laughed to himself and looked for a hidden speaker or a prank sign. Nothing. The voice slid into soft words without addressing anyone at all. Eastbound tonight with a white cab, trailer clean, plates ending in 2 and 7. Grant stopped laughing. His plate ended in a 2 and a 7. Not rare numbers, he told himself. A coincidence that felt like a tap on a shoulder. He backed toward the door. The soda machine clunked. The first real thunder arrived with conviction, rolling down from the clouds, like someone moving furniture in an upstairs room. He thought, storm weirdness, old wires picking up local chatter. He went back outside and into his cab, trying not to watch the door as if it might open on its own. The parking lot had filled with silver sheets, rain welding the air to the ground. He liked the sound of it on the roof. It sounded like busy people in another room that didn't need him. He turned his CB on, not because he believed in the voice, but because he didn't like being the only one awake. Static, a scratch, then a burst of chatter he couldn't parse. The voice from inside didn't come through. Only the storm, and then another rig pulling in, its lights dragging long shadows across the wet. For a while, he just watched. The wipers didn't move. The world fattened with water until the trees were soft pencils. He thought to sleep, but the map with the red dot kept intruding. He imagined pulling over on that bridge, walking out into the rain. No, he told himself. Bridges are for crossing. He checked his watch and did the math on the hours. He could afford a quick nap. When he drifted, he dreamed of the red dot being a thumbprint. He dreamed of rain that spelled his name in the sheen on the windshield. He dreamed the rest area's radio returned his hum like an echo. When he woke, the rain had thinned to a more reasonable curtain, and the clock on his dash was 2 minutes ahead. That detail felt wrong in a way he couldn't name. The clock had always been slow. He tapped the face, then shrugged. Maybe he'd bumped it. As he put the key in and turned, the CB crackled alive with a voice smoother and closer than before. The air between stations went quiet. The storm's hiss, holding its breath. "Skip the arch," the voice said. It wasn't a command exactly. It was more like a line of a song that knew its way back to him. "Take the service road. Skip the arch." Grant stared at the speaker, as if it were a person he preferred not to meet. He reached to turn the knob, then stopped. "Skip the arch," he repeated, not because he believed it and not because it made sense, but because sometimes repeating a thing made it ordinary. He eased the truck into drive and rolled back out into the flow of water. The road was clean and empty, the storm's wash making every sign look lacquered, the reflective paint bright enough to seem lit from within. He drove listening for chatter, listening for words that weren't his own. The storm's fringe had a way of turning the highway into a tunnel of pale. His fingers relaxed on the wheel when the miles clicked by without incident. He saw the sign for the bridge with the rusted arch. He knew the shape of that curve in the dark. A long, bent rib over the water, the kind that whistles in certain winds. The service road to the right was not much more than a suggestion, a line of narrower pavement that dropped under the line of trees. He would be alone there, and something in the part of his mind that had learned to love routine said, "No, stay on the main road, cross the water, save 7 minutes." The map with the red dot came back, the voice with its hum. He put his turn signal on. It clicked like a metronome timed to his pulse, which had picked up without permission. The road to the right accepted him with a hiss of wet gravel. For a few seconds, the trees on either side were one shape, green and black stitched together by rain. Then the woods opened, and the water took a place beside him, not roaring, not anything dramatic, just present, filming the banks with a flat shine under the wincing sky. He hadn't gone a quarter mile when something strange happened. The storm ahead brightened. Lightning hadn't flashed, but the gray took on a silver wash, and under that was an orange he recognized, sodium lights. He came around a bend expecting a stalled set of cars, an accident, a reason to feel foolish for having left the safety of the bridge's wider lanes. Instead, he saw a county truck, its yellow beacon yawning a lazy circle. 2 workers stood in rain gear, one pointing at a place where the shoulder had slumped into the river. It wasn't dramatic, not a collapse. Just a quiet, patient drag at the edge of the road, a suggestion that if something heavy stopped there, it might find itself lighter in a sudden, unkind way. He rolled past them slow, lifted his palm to the workers who barely looked up. The beacon's light looped across his cab. He wondered whether the arch he'd skipped had taken its own damage, imagined the long resonance of 1,000 drops on rust. He wondered how close to the edge he would have come if he'd stuck to the main route. He didn't call anyone to check. He kept moving, feeling the peculiar, soft gratitude that arrives when luck slides into the seat beside reason. "Skip the arch," the radio had said. He told himself it was a warning he would have discovered with or without a voice that knew his plates. At the far end of the service road, where it rejoined the highway, the rest area from before sat on the hill like a memory. He blinked. That made no sense. He'd only moved in one direction. Yet the same low brick, the same starved trees, the same soda machines glowed under the awning. The clock on his dash went back to its old lateness. He felt that as a dull knock on the inside of his chest. He looked for the two rigs he had parked between. He saw instead a single dark shape, the kind of shadow that holds its dimensions close. He downshifted and pulled in, listening for what the rain said on the roof now that it had learned his truck's name. He took the atlas from the passenger seat where he'd left it, except he hadn't taken an atlas, not physically. He'd only looked. This one lay on his seat, with the red dot bleeding a little at the edges like the ink had been touched by water. He didn't open it. He carried it inside under his jacket where the air smelled like the old carpet and missed appointments. The radio in the corner sat in the same place, unplugged. He put the atlas down on the table with care, because care felt like the only currency in such a place. The radio clicked. The voice, pleased with itself and not proud, said, "On time." Thunder chose that moment to make its modest case. A rumble that meant nothing except that the blotted sky was still above. He watched the needle on the dead radio's dial quiver and rest. After, months went by. The story didn't end on that night. Not exactly. In another county, a coffee counter late, Grant heard two drivers discussing the storm that took a slice of road off the arch in a way that was not newsworthy. Just a note for a maintenance log. "Lucky nobody stopped there," one said. Grant kept his mouth shut and sipped a coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. He passed the rest area more than once. Sometimes it was there, sometimes a blackened pad where a building had been, a sign that said closed for renovation, with letters that had not been new for years. He tried to stop once when the sign was fresh. He found only wooden barriers and a chain. The soda machine sat behind them, unplugged and turned at angles that suggested they were tired of being useful. On a clear night, far from weather and need, he switched his CB to the setting he didn't often use, the one that had found the voice. Static held in a fine line, the way air holds a scent after a garden had been cut. He almost hummed, then didn't. He watched the mile markers pop up at intervals that felt like promises the road kept to itself. He thought of the atlas at home now, tucked in the cabinet he kept for things that didn't have names. He thought of how the red dot hadn't faded when it should have. In the sleeper behind him, something small shuffled, a sound so mild that he nearly smiled. He knew what it was, the heat expanding the fabric, a bottle rolling against a soft wall. The radio clicked once, a polite little tap. No words came. He felt a relief that wasn't happiness. He focused on the lanes, the white stripes steady as breath. He didn't need the voice to warn him of anything that night. The lesson had been given and received and put away. But sometimes, when the road had a smell like wet iron and leaves that had traveled, when the sky folded itself low and there was a hum in the bones of the cab like a held-far note, the dead radio not plugged in anywhere would click in his mind. And when it did, he would remember to lift his foot a little sooner, to skip the thing that everyone else took for granted, to be a patient stone in the water's hand. That was all. He told no one. He didn't need to. Some warnings arrive without witnesses, and that's why they work. They say if you stop there now, at the right hour, in weather that doesn't care for gossip, the radio in the corner plays a song that sounds like a map being folded. The machines give you what you paid for, and only that. And somewhere, behind the hum and the static and the storm's careful knock on the roof, a voice matches your heartbeat without asking, and hums a wordless thing that, if you sit with it long enough, sounds very much like your own voice reminding you to leave on time. As the last echoes of the highway fade into the dark, remember not every story ends when the wheels stop turning. Somewhere out there, beyond the glow of the dashboard, the road still whispers, carrying the memories of what we've heard tonight. If you've stayed with us until the end, you're among the few who dare to face the dark. Don't forget to like this video, share your own chilling story in the comments, and subscribe to the sleep haunt where the night never ends and every mile hides a secret. Sleep well, if you can.